Recording in progress.
Sound testing 1, 2, 3. Welcome everybody. I take it you can hear me and you'll signal if you can't. Particularly our welcome goes to the stakeholders who are here, particularly from civil society. And I just want to also ask very quickly from the two secretaries if there are any apologies for today's meeting. Nkululeko?
Good morning, Chairperson, and good morning, members. It's afternoon, actually.
Yeah. Got it? Nobody?
Yes. I got 3 apologies from Ms. Mamarechane, Ms. Demoletsane, and Ms. Mahlangu, Chair. Thanks.
Yeah, Ms. Mahlangu is at the State of Province address, right, in Mpumalanga. Is that right?
That's correct, Chairperson.
Okay, right. And from your side, Alan?
Good afternoon, Mr. Karim. Standing Finance is Mr. De Villiers. Thank you.
Okay. Comrade Joe, do you want to say anything? Yeah, he's here. Co-chairperson, do you want to say anything?
Good afternoon, Comrade Karim and colleagues. No, there's nothing to say for now. You can proceed with the meeting.
Okay, so then we go to responses by National Treasury. We made a minor change. Joe, I didn't have time to contact you. The secretaries unusually gave the Budget Office of Parliament and the FFC 10 minutes. Now, both these organizations, they make full representations of a 3-hour period the day before the public hearings on Tuesday, was it? And you know, it doesn't seem fair when you have 13, larger number than usual, of stakeholders here. So we've asked them to speak for 5 minutes each. And as with others, they're welcome to make representations in writing. But secondly, to remind all of you that we take responsibility as committees for the observations and recommendations, but we prefer that you, rather than the staff, do the first draft of a summary or overview. And we ask each of you to submit a page. And the deadline was noon today, as it usually is, I take it. But we can extend it by 5 p.m. to 5 p.m. But after that, it's not fair because over the weekend, the staff have to prepare, then they have to submit it to the chairpersons, and by 5 o'clock on Monday, the latest, we have to send it out to committee members so that we vote in committees on Tuesday and we take it to the House on Wednesday. And so appropriations can begin its work. Having said that, what we'll do is take Treasury's response and then the stakeholders in the order, Kosato onwards, as you appeared at the public hearings. Over to you, National Treasury. Who's
Thank
here
you.
from? Yeah. Oh, it's Duncan Peterson. Welcome, DG, and your team.
Thank you, Chair, and to the Chair of SCOF as well, and to the honourable members, good afternoon. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to respond to the submissions. I am joined by the usual Treasury colleagues that are with me today from the different divisions, the Budget Office, of course, Public Finance, Tax and Financial Sector Policy, and Economic Policy colleagues are all here in the meeting. I will ask Edgar from our side to load the presentation. I do note that he has requested, Chair, that we be given sharing rights so that we are able to load the presentation. Of course, it has already been shared with the members. I will then make a few opening remarks and then hand over to Edgar and the rest of the team to take us through the presentation, if that is in order. Chair.
Yes, fine. Go ahead, please. Yeah, of course. Yeah, okay. Go right here.
Thank you. There we go. Thanks, Edgar. If we could just move to the first slide so that I can talk through some of those introductory remarks. So, Chair, this before perhaps let's just acknowledge the different submissions that we have received on the previous slide. As is our standard practice, we always indicate what those submissions are and who they've been received from, and then we cover those in our responses. So those that first slide is just to acknowledge those submissions. On the next slide, Chair, I think it's just a few opening points from my side. The one obvious point to make, which is typical of any budget that we present, of course, we acknowledge that there are quite a lot of different opinions on some of these matters. The fiscal framework in and of itself is always contested, and so the way that we try to respond to it from our side is to respond to the different views, but also to ensure that throughout our process that we take those into account insofar as is possible. I think what is very important for us is our continued commitment to transparency, and our budget process remains consistently ranked as one of the most transparent processes in the world. We last year, chairs and honorable members, we took the additional step, despite in our view, the very good track record we have on transparency, we took the additional step of bringing in the IMF team under the direction of the previous acting Director General to do a fiscal transparency evaluation. And we've published a box in Chapter 1 of the budget review on that. And I think that fiscal transparency evaluation did two things. One, it affirms some of the strengths of the budget from a transparency point of view, but it highlighted in particular 3 areas where we need to improve. And we note those 3 areas in the box, and we will continue to work on those. As I've said, that was covered in Chapter 1. We, of course, as always, reflect all our answers to the committees in the relevant Annexure A of the budget review, and all of our formal correspondence that we submit to the various stakeholders as required, and we make sure that we take all of those views into account when we provide those responses. Just a more generic point, we obviously ensure that all of our cash management, and this is a point that we want to re-emphasize, is in line with the Appropriation Act. So all departments receive what is appropriated by Parliament, and our cash management team, with the help of the colleagues in the Office of the Accountant General, then ensure that those disbursements are made at the right time during the course of the financial year. Chairs, with those few words, I want to now hand over to Edgar to kick us off, and then the rest of the team will come in where appropriate. Thank you, Chairs.
Thank you,
You
Honourable
must
Chair.
go ahead with your team, right? I'm not going to say next and so on. You know who speaks next, so I won't intervene. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Good afternoon. I'm going to go through the rest of the slides as quickly as I can, mindful of time. Let me also indicate, Honourable Chair, that and members, that given the volume of information that we have to reply to, we consider that the details in the slides, we're not going to go through each and every single point because there's no time, but we consider it as submitted for the purposes of the committee's report, even where we have not been able to necessarily go through each and every single point in detail, Chair, and hope that that is in order. I'm going to then proceed. Let me just stop my video so that we can save some bandwidth on the by starting with a reflection on the outlook and how we see it. The economic growth performance of South Africa has been poor for quite some time. And Chair, as we indicated, and as we reaffirmed in the analysis in Chapter 2 of the budget review, and I'll refer obviously members and all stakeholders to that detail, poor economic growth has strongly correlated with weak investment, the poor electricity availability and logistics performance. And in addition to that, low spending multipliers suggest that movements in spending are not materially affected growth. I will return to this later in detail, but just to say that the policy implications are that first, we must address the impediments to growth, and that is part of the growth reform agenda that we have outlined. And the second implication is that in the South African context, fiscal consolidation is not, in our view, hurting growth and could be beneficial to the extent that it is targeted and balanced. And we will outline that detail as well, Honourable Chair. At the same time, we also acknowledge the fact that the importance of price stability and inflation is a key part of the macroeconomic policy of government, and we will reflect on that as well as issues related to investment in the economy for growth. In this regard, government has a strategy for growth, and the 3 pillars are based on global experience and evidence showing that no country has achieved economic success and development with high inflation, high interest rates, and high debt. Therefore, public finances must be healthy and prices must not go out of control, while global and domestic shocks will from time to time affect these goals that are part of the strategy. And the objective itself must be maintained. And so a sound macro framework is critical for ensuring that you have sustainable economic growth. While other measures may have a short-term impact, they do not deliver the same long-term growth outcomes that this pillar ensures. The second is that there must be appropriate foundations for growth. There must be electricity, the trains must move and on time, and the ports must operate efficiently. And these are key things without which you cannot have economic growth. And they have been clearly having an impact on growth over the last number of years, and in some cases for more than a decade and a half. And finally, the state must get the basics right, and the capacity of the state needs to reflect this priority as indicated in this pillar. So, Chair, those are the three pillars of the strategy for securing economic growth, but not just doing it in the short term, but doing it in a sustainable and long-term way as outlined. While shocks can cause disturbances, the broad trends are quite clear. When debt is in decline, the risk premium and therefore the cost of borrowing also declines. When debt is rising, the cost of borrowing also rises. At the same time, poor growth was strongly correlated, as I've said, with falling investment in South Africa, as reflected in the graph shown on the right. The 2024 budget intends to reverse both of these trends. So the strategy, Chair, is linked to a problem statement reflecting in many ways these two things that are reflected here. And we consider that it is not necessarily to deal with them as if they are opposed to each other. In fact, it is possible to deal with them at the same time. Development is not possible if you don't have stable public finances, and that is a key part of what the strategy aims to deliver. Overlaying all of that are reforms to enhance growth and investment and to improve the capacity of the economy to grow over the long term. Moving on, as I've indicated, and there were several questions on the issue of inflation targeting and asking why inflation targeting is done. Honorable members, as from our perspective, we are aware of no country in the world that has achieved successful, inclusive growth through high inflation. High inflation hurts the economy. It hurts the poor more than anybody else in any economy. In this regard, ensuring that prices are broadly stable to the extent that it is within our power to do so, that is, setting aside, of course, the impact from time to time of external shocks we cannot control, is especially essential for long-run economic growth and especially essential for ensuring that the most vulnerable in society are protected from these vagaries. And so inflation targeting is a key pillar of macroeconomic policy precisely for this reason and no other. And what we have seen over the years is that inflation targeting has helped to lower inflation and interest rates over the long term. Again, taking into account the fact that there will from time to time be shocks, over the long term, inflation targeting continues to broadly deliver results and to ensure a more stable price trajectory for the economy. As I've indicated on the issue of shocks, one of the things that we did note in the presentations that were done during this week by a number of stakeholders is that in a number of cases, matters that, or events, excuse me, that occurred as a result of exogenous shocks are too quickly attributed to macro policy decisions. And I think that in our view, Chair, some of the presentations did not adequately take into account the fact that shocks actually explain a lot of the slippages that we have seen over the last number of years, but do not refute that these policies are actually important for the economy and indeed, frankly, the most vulnerable in the economy. At the same time, Honorable Chair, we fully accept that South Africa's central challenge is a lack of economic growth, and the reform agenda is directed at addressing this problem. However, as I've said, this does not mean that we can or should ignore the obvious fact that in spite of a steady increase in revenues over the years since the 2008 global financial crisis, government spending has risen faster. Even when revenue collection achieves records that are unusual for a developing country, like we were able to achieve in 2022-23, there is a structural imbalance. Spending is structurally higher than revenues, and that is a challenge that needs to be addressed. At the same time, the challenge of economic growth is addressed. We do not agree that these two things should be seen as opposites of each other. They must be dealt with hand in hand. This structural imbalance and the structural fiscal deficit is the biggest component of the borrowing requirement of government, as reflected in Table 7.2 of the budget review, which again I refer honourable members to as illustration of the details, which are quite voluminous. But essentially, the deficit position of government has been the main driver of the high debt levels, and therefore underscoring the need to target the structural imbalance for the purposes of fiscal policy. With respect to fiscal sustainability and the goals that are outlined in Budget 2024, I wish to stress that these goals are consistent with what was originally outlined in the MTBPS of 2020. And they are outlined throughout this presentation and, of course, throughout the budget review. Fiscal sustainability and economic development go hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other. I will return to the subject of fiscal consolidation, which, of course, was raised during this week and no doubt will continue to be raised in a few minutes. But for now, let me assure honourable members that government is very much on track to achieving the different elements of the fiscal strategy that was first outlined in the 2020 MTBPS. And in this regard, we are optimistic that the challenges that we face, though considerable and very serious, can be overcome. This budget contains all of these elements. First, debt is still on its way to stabilizing in 2025-26. That is precisely the same target as what we had in 2020, and we're still on track. Debt service costs will stop growing and begin to decline if this strategy is retained. The primary balance continues to improve. Capital investment budgets are now growing at double digits, showing that the fourth component of the strategy, which was published in 2020, which is around the composition of spending being shifted towards capital investment, is happening. In addition to all of this, Chair and honourable members, more than 60% of the more than 6 trillion rand budget is going towards key services such as education, health, social protection, the police, justice, and other areas. And these are indeed protected in the current budget. I refer honourable members to figure 5.1 in the budget review, chapter 5, figure 5.1, which shows that although there have been reductions and additions, the additions to certain functions, particularly in education and in health, are actually more than the reductions that were previously announced at the time of the MTBPS. And again, we will return to this in a few minutes. This strategy is critical because if we don't do anything, South Africa's debt problem will escalate. We are 16% worse off than our peers in terms of debt, and our interest costs have escalated over time. And if we don't take action, what we have seen over the number of years, where debt service costs, having been at around 80 billion in the past, have, as the years have gone by, as reflected here, simply eaten up more and more of the resources available for other things and have gradually become a binding constraint on the developmental intentions of government. And so, Chair, we want to emphasize this point, and we cannot, in our view, overemphasize it. We need to take steps to ensure that this challenge is addressed, and that is what the fiscal strategy is designed to do. Moving on to the subject which has been raised, and it brings me to the subject of fiscal consolidation, about which, of course, there's always quite a lot said, and no doubt will continue to be said. Honourable members, we want to make a couple of fairly straightforward points on the basis of the information that we've read, including papers that were quoted during the course of this week. And I made a similar point at the time of the MTBPS in November. There were quotations made from documents, speeches, and statements made from international organizations. With the greatest respect, it is our view that these quotations are often taken out of context. We do not see broad, much less global repudiation of fiscal consolidation as a principle. What we see are warnings and caution, where advice ranges from caution about self-defeating action to strategies that require that we make sure that the steps we take are targeted and are strategic. Indeed, the most recent international advice to South Africa is to implement fiscal consolidation. So we respectfully disagree with the assertion that somehow there is some international consensus against fiscal consolidation, or that we have been advised not to do it. Indeed, the opposite is true. The most recent advice is that growth-friendly fiscal consolidation is possible in South Africa. And it's not difficult to see why. If you look at spending trends over time, if you look at the impact of bailouts to state-owned enterprises, if you look at the impact of state capture and corruption and waste and inefficiency, if you look at the fact that we've seen a decline in capital investment and capital spending, this shows that there are opportunities to actually realign the system, consolidate, and ensure that at the same time that you're closing the structural gap, you actually improve the effectiveness of government spending. And in our reading of the papers, we have seen precisely the same logic coming through. So for this reason, we consider that the specific context of our fiscal consolidation is not self-defeating and can in fact be an important foundation for ensuring both stability and development. I'm not going to go through this slide because it is, to some extent, some of it is a repeat of what I've already said about the strategy, just to underscore the point that it's not a brand new strategy. It's a strategy first introduced several years ago, accepted by Cabinet, and of course, Parliament agreed to it on several occasions. Nevertheless, it's important for me to point out that our consolidation measures are balanced in different ways. We're not just leaning on expenditure reductions. There is a balance between revenue measures and expenditure measures. There is also a balance in the sense that where reductions are made, certain things are protected. Over the medium term, for example, we have proposed in this budget additional amounts compared to the 2023 MTBPS that will ensure that the salaries of teachers, nurses, doctors, and many other public servants, including in the police, as well as in correctional services and other places, are actually catered for. And we have retained our commitment to ensure that a large majority of the budget continues to be spent on the social wage, and that's very clear in the numbers. At the same time that we're doing this, as indicated, we're achieving the targets that we set for ourselves back in 2020. And this is the debt trajectory as reflected in Chapter 3 of the budget review, as well as in Chapter 1, to indicate how these policies are projected to impact the debt trajectory over time. What this will mean is, among other things, that debt service costs will peak as a share of revenue and then begin to decline thereafter. So one of the central problems that we've been experiencing and that I've articulated here again is the fact of debt service costs crowding out other policy areas or policy areas of government. And so for that reason, it's important that we begin to see that increase stop and begin to decline. And the strategy is designed to do precisely that, thus freeing up more resources for those important service delivery requirements that are part of the priorities of government. Chair, I also want to address another issue that was raised in respect of requests that are made for information from different stakeholders. And I want to start by indicating that it is important to note that the budget is not and should not always be seen as a purely mechanistic exercise. It is a convention in government that budgets tabled by the minister are first agreed to by cabinet before being tabled. It is the product of these decisions and choices made by cabinet, and not always a model or something of the sort that results in the numbers that you see. And frankly, that's how it should be. It should not be the case that the leadership is denuded of their decision-making powers, and we respect that. Sometimes the Treasury's recommendations are accepted, sometimes they're not. But the ultimate product is what cabinet has chosen, not a purely mechanistic exercise. In addition to this, there is no difference between what Parliament appropriates to departments and what departments get in cash. The suggestion that there is a difference is incorrect. Departments can only get and will only get what Parliament appropriates to them. Nothing more, nothing less. The only exceptions are where there is a condition to the receiving of funds, including through the Division of Revenue Act. And that, of course, is something that Parliament will itself have endorsed before it takes place. And so that is something that is audited by the Auditor General, and every department, when they submit an annual report, includes in their annual financial statements a component called the appropriation statement, which, to my knowledge, in the years that I've been in the Treasury, has always balanced in respect of departmental receipts from the fiscus. We also, where the issue of the wage increase was also raised, and we want to affirm that the injections that have been made do account for the cost of the 2023 wage agreement, and that in fact the numbers that were first assessed last year have now come in line with what's available for departments in respect of the proposals in this budget. So this is also in answer to a question that was raised about whether or not for the personnel intensive departments we've made resources available for the wage agreement. We have. With respect to the future of wage negotiations, as indicated in the past, one of the challenges with budgeting for wages is that the wage setting process is not historically aligned with the budget process. So the idea that we should somehow know what the wages should be under circumstances where wage negotiations have not been concluded is something that we don't quite understand or accept. Nevertheless, Chair, this is a matter that we and the Minister personally has taken up. And from 2025-26 onward, there has been an agreement among the parties at the Public Sector Coordinating Bargaining Council that we will endeavor to ensure that wage negotiations are concluded before the finalization of the budget. And we hope that this helps resolve the issue of perceived misalignments between a wage agreement and what's actually in the budget. And of course, we'll continue updating Parliament in that respect going forward. One of the issues that was also raised in at least one presentation over the course of this week was thoughts in respect of fiscal multipliers. And this is important as it relates, of course, to our fiscal strategy, including fiscal consolidation. One of the points that we've noted and that have been noted through various research that's been done, including papers and the National Treasury's own internal estimates, is that in South Africa, fiscal multipliers are extremely low. What does that mean? It means that although government spending as just a total size is a significant portion of the economy, about a third of GDP is government spending at the general government expenditure level. Changes in government expenditure in other words, a movement up or a movement down, don't have, particularly a movement up, don't have a very significant impact on economic growth. A key reason for this is because there's a big difference between making a change in government expenditure when your debt levels are sitting at 20 or 25% versus making a change in government expenditure when your debt levels are sitting at 75%. The additional spending is borrowed money, and that borrowed money incurs interest. And the interest extracts both from growth and fiscal space in a manner that counteracts the additional spending that you are doing. So that is essentially the multiplier story. And for that reason, we've tended to take a different view, and in some cases profoundly disagree with the views that claim that if we can just increase government spending and borrowing, the economy would be fine. We don't think that that is the case, and we consider that the analysis of fiscal multipliers and the papers that have been written in this regard illustrate that conclusion quite well. Another issue that was raised is in respect of fiscal rules and fiscal anchors, with certain statements that were made that were not factually correct, to be honest. South Africa, the work that we're currently doing on fiscal rules and fiscal anchors is neither arbitrary nor is it something new or some unheard of innovation. In fact, South Africa has a long history of having explicit fiscal rules and fiscal anchors. The issue is about finding both a rule and an approach to implementing it that works for ensuring fiscal sustainability. And there are various very detailed pieces of work that we're currently engaging in. And as we indicated at the time, or rather in the budget review, in both chapters 1 and chapter 2, we will engage in a fairly wide consultation. And I'm quite sure that the stakeholders represented here will be major participants of that consultation in respect of looking at this issue of fiscal rules. Finally, Honorable Chair and Honorable Members, I suppose one other thing needs to be said, which is that the purpose of fiscal rules is not to constrain policy. The purpose of fiscal rules is to ensure that you maintain a level of fiscal sustainability that avoids having to force the government to make painful adjustments when things go wrong. In other words, the anchor allows you to build buffers without which shocks can put you in a position where dramatic and frankly damaging adjustments may need to be made in the future. In fact, from our perspective, Chair, the reason we're working on anchors and rules is to not have a repeat of what we've had to go through over the last 3 years, not have to make these adjustments that are obviously the subject of these difficult debates. Moving on, Chair.
May I come in? You've got 9 minutes as a team. I hope you recognize that. Thank you. Left.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to, as I said, there's a number of slides I am going to skip.
Yeah, no, I understand you. We've all got copies of it here.
Right. Okay, so I'm gonna skip a number of slides. There were a number of questions on tax policy considerations in respect of various suggestions. Let me summarize firstly by looking at the first and these two components in a summarized sort of way. As the DG indicated in his opening remarks, like other things, the views on tax proposals are mixed. And in some cases, they are kind of paradoxical, I guess you could say, to each other. And we have noted these comments, and this is part of the balanced approach that we need to undertake, because there's a wide variety of views on the issue of taxes, but we have listed there a number of the elements. By the way, we've also provided in instances where stakeholders have requested, including in writing, written replies to the comments as well as the questions that they've asked on the subject of tax. There were suggestions around alternatives, for example, on increasing the top brackets on the personal income taxes, removing deductions and incentives, and so on and so forth, including the ETI. We've previously stated, Chair, that we have made adjustments to the upper brackets of income taxes in the country. And we have previously presented to this committees what the impact of that was. And indeed, we've provided information to those organizations that have asked about this directly as well. We have also previously informed the committee about proposals on moving away from the ETI, the employment tax incentive, which are not new. They've been made before. There have been lots of discussions about this. And the review of incentives did take place, including the ETI. There is currently an agreement which was agreed to by NEDLEC partners to extend the incentive. So to the extent that these agreements need to be constantly looked at, we will do that. But we have previously provided feedback in this regard, and we want to remind the committee of this. There were questions around the impact of changes in the CIT rate that were announced effective in April 2022. This slide provides an analysis of, in fact, it's not a new analysis in the sense that we've actually provided this to a number of people, including some of the people that are here on this platform. But this is a summary, Chair, of how, in the end, we consider that the overall reform to the corporate income tax, which was about broadening the base, has actually been more positive than negative. There's been some positives that have offsets the negative. But at this time, there's been no real impact on the fiscal framework. We haven't seen any, in our analysis, any loss to the fiscal framework as a result of that. But we will continue analyzing. It's still only about a year's worth of financial outcomes that have been observed here, because it's a relatively recent reform. Chair, let me move on. There were questions on the global minimum corporate tax rate. We provide answers there on what it is. We also have highlighted the fact that South Africa's own domestic corporate tax rate is in any case higher than the global minimum corporate tax. And we need to consider introducing the effective tax rate at that level as the appropriate approach, because obviously once other countries are at 15% and you're at 28%, there are implications to that. We've also provided an answer there with respect to taxes arising from the mining sector in 2021 and what our thinking in that regard. And finally, we provide answers in respect of alcohol, excise, illicit trade, as well as the health promotions levy. There were questions about debt management. Chair, in summary, South Africa has an active debt management strategy. We publish benchmarks in Chapter 7 of the budget review. We invite stakeholders to go through those benchmarks. For the sake of time, as you've warned me, can't go through everything. We invite stakeholders to familiarize themselves with that in the budget review. In addition to that, we provide detailed information in the budget review on the reform to the gold and foreign exchange contingency reserve account and the principles that we have adopted for the framework that will govern the settlement of the account into the future. We want to note the fact that going forward, we consider that this matter of JFECRA should be regularized. In other words, the building up of large valuation benefits, ending up with a big settlement like the one that is happening now, should not be part of the future, because the framework will essentially ensure that whenever there is a valuation benefit it moves, and then if there is a buffer that's required, a buffer is retained for currency fluctuations and other things. Chair, let me go towards the end of the presentation by reflecting on comments around the state-owned companies that were made during the course of the public hearings. We do want to reiterate the fact that to those that are raising an issue about supporting state-owned companies, the issue of state-owned companies is not about service delivery as it relates to the bailouts. The bailouts to state-owned companies have been given over years not to extend services to South Africans. For the most part, they've been given because state-owned companies were badly run and were plunged into financial distress, forcing the taxpayer to bail them out. This is a very unfortunate, and frankly, I would describe it as a galling reality of our fiscal history that should not have happened. And we need to pursue an approach that avoids these into the future in whatever way that we can. But this slide shows how the state-owned companies have received billions and billions in support for an extended period of time, with few exceptions over the last decade and a half, to illustrate the nature of the problem, and to reaffirm the fact that we consider that we really should move away from this. They've received a lot of support. It's had a significant impact on government's ability to fund other things that needed to be funded, and in fact has played a role in the fiscal challenges that we are experiencing, that we are trying to fix. Chair, there were other areas raised in closing, including in respect of the common monetary area as well as SARS payments. I do want to take a few seconds just to indicate the fact that the questions and statements in respect of SACU. A year ago, of course, we were asked to provide information. We want to assure the committee and confirm that we agree with the committee that all information related to SACU should be released, including the SACU calculation formula. There's no issue in that regard, and there's no daylight between us and the committees on that subject. But as we indicated in the letter that we sent to yourself, Honorable Chair, in March 2023, there are opposing views from third parties. The other member countries who are third parties, as well as the SACU Secretariat, have a different view. We have to respect that view, even as we are working with them to change their opinions and to move to a different direction. And that is the reason why there was a delay in providing that information, and that was a reason why we couldn't submit it. So we're not aware of anything suspicious. We just think that it's a matter of negotiating with our partners to change their views or to help them perhaps see a different view in respect of this particular issue. And finally, Chair, or not finally, just before we go to the last one, we also provide information on the effectiveness of public-private partnerships and the opportunities that they present in order to ensure that we not only improve planning, but also have innovations in the delivery of infrastructure in the partnerships between the public and private sector. Various questions were asked in addition to employment programs and other things, and we provide answers there. The one thing I just want to point out, Chair, is on the issue of gender responsive budgeting. We do acknowledge that there have been delays. There are methodological issues and data issues because we depend on departments and work with departments to provide information on gender responsive budgeting numbers. We regret the fact that there has been a delay, and we're continuing to work to ensure that the information is credible rather than complying for compliance sake. We want the information to be credible before we publish it, and we will continue to work in this area. And we're happy to provide regular feedback both to the committee as well as to stakeholders on this matter. The other issues, Chair, are covered there, and the conclusion is a summary of what I've already said.
Okay,
so
thank you.
I can stop there at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right now, Kusatu, you're up first in the order in which you appeared. Each of you's got 4 minutes. I'll use the stopwatch on the cell phone. Let's get going. Kusatu, are you here? Matthew, or who else is here?
Yeah, afternoon, Chair. Now we're here. We can start if you want.
Yeah, go right ahead. Thank you.
No, thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks to colleagues from Treasury for the feedback. Chair, look, we do appreciate government's got a very difficult balancing act. The challenges facing government, society, workers, the poor, businesses is really there's a multiplicity of challenges, and we appreciate there's no single solution. I think where we disagree and divert philosophically with Treasury colleagues share is that we think the solution is to grow the economy. Reducing the debt is not going to grow the economy. We think, Chair, we're simply going to be continuing to tread water. And if you actually want to reduce all the debt indicators, then we need to actually find ways to grow businesses, reduce unemployment, address the network obstacles, etc. Chair, we do think that there are some positive parts. For example, the infrastructure allocation, about 943 billion rand over 3 years. That's great. But we need to really make sure, we do hope the capacitation programs for local government will help to see that money being spent and spent well, just to see we don't have rollovers. Chair, I think we do think we give up a little bit too little lip service to industrial financing. The amount of money we spend on industrialization programs, export incentives, we think it really is far too little. It collectively is about 20 billion rand. I think there's an additional 1 billion rand, and there's a motor manufacturing electric vehicle tax incentive this year. But given the extent of the crisis facing industrialization, we think we should have been actually putting much, much more there. We do want to welcome, Chair, the additional relief to Eskom. We think we are beginning to turn the corner on the electricity crisis. But we do think, Chair, we should be seeing how can we actually ease the debt relief conditions to Eskom, not to be actually tightening it as we seem to be doing with the interest charges. We think, there is support being given to Transnet. We have seen some initial positive news in the last month, the last 2 months, but we think, especially on Transnet Freight Rail, Chair, we were still on very, very difficult terrain, and we should be seeing what more support can we give, especially from law enforcement, because not all of it is a debt issue. And similarly, Chair, we would hope to see more turnaround packages, and not just debt, it's also other issues, corruption management, etc., for Metro Rail, for other SOEs. Chair, we are glad in the budget, Chair, that it actually says the wage bill is not out of control. It's decreased from 35 to 31%. We're actually quite worried about the brain drain we see of skilled professionals like doctors, nurses, paramedics, teachers, and so forth. There is good news about increasing the police headcount. That's welcome. We need to do a bit more because we've bled quite a bit in the police over the past decade. We'd also have hoped to see more recruitment of skilled professionals for the NPA, like prosecutors for the courts, etc. On the appropriations, Chair, it's a bit of a mixed bag because you have some being cut below inflation, some getting above inflation. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. I think, Chair, with the 3 parts we're really disappointed on is that in SONA, the President was quite bold and eloquent to say we're going to increase the SRD grant and enhance it. It hasn't been done. It's just simply been extended for a year. So there's been no inflationary adjustment for 4 years. And it's beyond shameful, Chair, that these recipients can't even get inflation adjustments. But politicians would get, the ministers would get. The Presidential Employment Program, Chair, really has done wonderful work. And again, would have hoped to see a shift in the allocations because it's been cut from 36 billion rand over the last 3 years to about 7 billion rand now. And it's a wonderful program. We should be actually increasing it to help young people enter the labor market. But we do appreciate, Chair, the very bold commitment and support from the Minister of Finance for the 2-part pension reforms and the support for
about 20 seconds they've made.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I think, Chair, just lastly, we support the relief from the Reserve Bank. Let's use it smartly to assist Eskom and Transnet. And I think the very last point, Chair, is that we really hope to see more support be given to SARS because that's critical to increase tax compliance and thus help plug the fiscal holes, Chair. But we'll submit our 1 page this afternoon to the Secretary. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, obviously all of you can add based on what you heard today in response to your earlier submission of the hearings. Fiscal Club Study Group. Thanks, Matthew. Fiscal Cliff, please. Is anybody here?
Hi, Chair. I don't see them in the platform.
Okay. Public Economy Project.
Hi, Chair.
Yeah. Oh, yes, of course. Hi.
I think all I will say is that Treasury has, this response has, I think, raised the level of debate in what has been, I think, this year, probably the highest quality of debate at the parliamentary hearings on fiscal policy that I have seen. And I think maybe next year we should consider giving Treasury more time to present their response, because we'll get like 2 days to criticize the budget. Of course, they do have the budget to present, but it would be good to get a bit of a longer and more detailed response. Treasury has provided a lot of detail on the slides, which is fantastic, but it would be good to have their response in full. We look forward to the invitation extended by Treasury, I think, to all of us to participate in a debate about fiscal rules. And I think that debate should extend to not only consider numerical rules, but also procedural reforms to the budget process. I think the suggestion that wage negotiations be concluded for the budget that's the kind of procedural reform to the budget process that is actually much more important for fiscal sustainability than the numerical targets, in my view. So, and lastly, in the interest of transparency, I would wanted to appeal to the DG. I don't know, I may be speaking out of ignorance, but it would be good to see the IMF's fiscal transparency review published, and similar advice that Treasury gets from international organizations. I think it's always down to the authorities themselves, in other words, the South African government, to decide whether these things get published. And I think the norm should be that they are published, but obviously there might be some exceptions. So thank you very much, and we look forward to the MTBPS.
Thank you, Michael. You've only used up 2 minutes, but fine. Look, I think the committee will agree with that. And insofar as we do, can we plead with the researchers to put that in, the commitment to engage with stakeholders on the range of issues around fiscal rules and related issues that have just been mentioned, right? And Treasury has agreed to that. And the incoming committee can hold them to account. We might want to put in some deadline within 3 months. Maybe that's unreasonable, as elections. So within 6 months, this must happen. And in the exit reports, Comrade Joe and I will ensure that whatever we agreed to here is also handed over to the new committee. Okay, next then is Public Economy Project. That's done. Amandla Mobi, are you here? Are they here in Kulileko?
I did not see Chloe in the platform as well.
All right. If they come in, they can come in, right? Healer?
Thank you, Chair. It's Petronelle Kruger from Gila, and apologies, I won't be switching on
Yeah.
my video.
Oh, that's fine.
Great. We don't really have too much to say, so we predominantly made comments about the HPL, which really ties in with some of the larger submissions on excise taxation. Maybe just to thank Treasury for what was a really excellent presentation, and we do appreciate this level of transparency in public participation. It therefore makes it a little bit difficult because the presentation was short and there wasn't enough time for the presenter to get to our specific issue that we're concerned about. So I don't know if this criticism is fair, but just based on the PowerPoint presentation, it does seem like the comments that we made weren't really addressed. So we were very concerned about the fact that there weren't inflationary increases. So the health promotion levy has been decreasing. And there was really just an acknowledgement that that's the fact, and then just this blanket statement again that it's for some kind of economic good that we've challenged in the past, and we haven't really had an opportunity to debate that and really engage with whether or not the actual approach by Treasury has any real life impact on the sugar industry. And I think that's something that we should think about having further engagements, because we believe it goes to the rationality of the decision to defer the health promotion levy. And then finally, just to say that on some of the prior applications, while we do understand that there's a measure of decision-making that happens that doesn't always allow itself to be drawn from a specific model or a specific decision-making pattern, we do think that, especially on prior request, it is very open for Treasury or any government actor to respond with a narrative of how they reached a decision. And then in a situation where there isn't a concrete document to refer to, that narrative can still be used, because it is, of course, very important for government decision making to always be transparent. Thank you so much.
Yeah, look, man, I think the majority of us, if I've got this right, are broadly empathetic and sympathetic and supportive of what HELA does. But as you well know, there's a complex set of interests that have to be balanced out, we've repeatedly said. But Treasury all should reply more specifically if they feel in a minute or so when you reply, or we'll give you the space to, that they haven't been addressed. Secondly, we referred that bill because of the complex set of issues that have to be dealt with and our limited technical skills in SCOF in the last term of Parliament to deadlock. Another option to think about, DG, is to put this in the deadlock process and have a full discussion before the MTBPS. Ultimately, we keep reminding people that it's Parliament's decision, not the executives, not deadlock, as much as we respect the consensus that's sought there and sometimes arrived at. But this issue keeps coming up, and we're very glib in our replies. As for giving Treasury more time, Michael, you know the constraints we have in Parliament, but it's correct. And we have asked for the Money Bills Act to be reviewed in this term, but there wasn't the space. There isn't the time to repeat things I've said. But I think as we exit, we must really put this issue on the agenda, the need for some changes and the need for more space, for more discussion. The budget is all too important to be dealt with in this way, but we try to do our best within the constraints. And we did try to provide latitude. I think, Michael, you were still in Treasury when we reviewed the Money Bills Act, and it required a fundamental change to the parliamentary term and so on. But we don't have time to deal with all of that here. But in principle, we might want to put into our report that we urgently request review within the first year of the 7th Parliament. Then we go to Budget Justice Coalition. Are they here? They don't seem to.
They are not here, Chair.
All right. Given that several of them are not here, we need to give more space to Treasury to reply, because two of the stakeholders have raised the need for them to deal more. You see, it's very hard for us as chairs to know how to balance things, because the civil society stakeholders feel that 10 minutes is not enough and covering the report is not enough. They want to engage more with Treasury. And then, we find often that they don't use their full time. And so maybe we should learn, Comrade Joe, from this, that we give more time to Treasury. And we should try to expand the hours here, especially now they're doing Zoom meetings. But there you are. These are things that we should consider putting in an exit report, but some should go into our report, into our reports that we take to our respective houses. Okay, so then we move to the next people. That's Institute of Taxation, SAIT. Are they here?
I did see one of them here. He was at Cat or so.
Is he still here?
No, right. I don't.
Okay. Chartered accountants, are they here?
I did not see them as well, Chair.
Oh, dear.
They're not here.
Liquor brand owners?
Not here as well, Chair.
SA Wine?
Yes, SA Wine is here. Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Leah, can you hear me?
Yes. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I think I'll keep it short. I think I think I would like to say thank you very much for the presentation and the feedback. I think what's important for us is looking at the 3 bullets there on page 21, and in terms of the reasoning for the above inflationary increase, specifically on wine. And if you look at the others, beer as well as spirits, all 3 of us sitting between 2 and 2.5%, wine even more. So still we need to understand that. And on the other side, by increasing the prices, and let's take, for example, it's going to be increase in the retail selling price. What about affordability? And typical now, what you will get in a country like us, people might say, well, it's getting too expensive now. Guess what? I'm not buying less, but maybe I need to go the illicit route. And I think that's important what we're trying to say. If we keep it within a CPI adjustment every year, at least maybe they can then clamp down on illicit. Otherwise, we keep on rising it above CPI, even 2.5%. And now SARS must go out there and clamp down on illicit. I think it's two opposing things that we need to discuss at some stage. And then the other thing what's important for us to understand is also the role of the Agri Master Plan and how we would like to work with government in that. And that's why the reason we're asking for CPIX adjustment. We fully understand the challenges of the country and also listening to the feedback now, and we're willing to play our part. But in terms of 2.5%, that for us is not sitting well. And I think we need to be open and honest, as all the speakers have been today. So this is the only feedback I want to table here. But at least we're on the board there. And I think more important, please have a look at our presentation as well as our submission. You will get the detail there. You will also see in terms of research, where we refer to whatever you do, excise is not going to clamp down on misuse and abuse. We need other mechanisms to do so, and maybe governments, interdepartments need to work with one another. And we would like to leave it there, but we would like to keep the conversation open. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Sean Muller. Is he here?
Yes, Chair, he was here.
Yes, Chairperson, I am here.
Go ahead,
I'm still
please.
here. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chairperson. I also won't take a lot of time, but then since I only have 4 minutes, I don't have a great deal of time in the first place. First of all, just to repeat the sentiment that I did have in my presentation, which is just to really emphasize the value of this process. Other stakeholders have said the same, but really on certain key issues, we actually get more detail and more technical detail from this process than we sometimes get from the budget documents. To get to the substantive issues, this ETI issue, Chairperson, I mean, I do understand where the colleagues in Treasury are coming from, since these decisions are ultimately not purely technocratic. But in my professional opinion, and somebody who's worked a lot on this incentive, there really is no evidence to show that it's creating jobs. It's costing, based on the budget documents, over 6 billion a year. And that would be impossible to justify if this was an expenditure program. In that context, I've raised the concern about the cuts to employment programs. Again, the Treasury's response in that respect is, one might say, procedural, which is to say, well, this is how things were scheduled to happen. But that doesn't take away from the fact that budgets are being cut for employment and work creation programs at a time when unemployment is extremely high, in addition to our usual problems of inequality and so forth. So I stand by the recommendation I made. I think there's a very clear decision to be made here, which Parliament is well within its powers to do, which is simply to make a couple of small amendments, reduce the amount of money that's lost to tax expenditure linked to the ETI, and shift that amount to expenditure on these works programs to protect those, to protect that job and work creation initiative. Just to make a small point about the fiscal multiplier, I don't think I commented on that in my presentation. I might have been in my written submission, but it is something I've criticized elsewhere. I just want to make a point that from a technical point of view, estimating fiscal multipliers credibly is extremely difficult. It's actually debatable whether you can do it at all. So I think I'm a little skeptical about these claims, but the bigger point is that one shouldn't rest too much on estimates of fiscal multipliers, whatever they're saying. There are certain basic facts we know about how government expenditure impacts on the economy. If you're spending money on employment creation programs, you are creating jobs. Those people will spend that money, and that will stimulate the economy. The rest is perhaps a little bit more speculative. And the last thing, I guess, just in the very limited time available, on the corporate tax rate, even if we accept, and some of that information was provided to me.
John,
yeah.
Others haven't taken their space. So, you can have 2 more minutes, and so can anybody else who's spoken already, particularly Kosatu, who were cut short mid-sentence, I regret to say. So it's fine. You can take 6 minutes. Yeah.
I'm almost done, Jefferson. All I wanted to say was that even if we accept Treasury's explanation on the corporate tax rate, that still means that essentially the corporate tax burden, if you want to call it that, is being shifted, being reduced on large, highly profitable companies that can in fact pay more. And given the fiscal situation, arguably measures should be taken to make sure that they do pay more. Thank you, Chairperson.
I see there's something on the chat group from Siraj saying he's understanding. Yes, I agree. There's two components to it. Some people want Treasury to speak more so they can engage more with them. And others want to engage with each other and the committee. So yes, Siraj, we're all on the same page. AIDC, are they here?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, please go ahead. Yes, certainly.
Okay, so we would like to thank Treasury for the presentation. I'm just going to be making a few brief comments. The first one is that spending is, the presentation made the point that spending is structurally higher than revenue. But we would like to further stress that over the past years, there's not been any attempt to increase the tax to GDP ratio, and our presentation emphasized this a lot about making additional room to enhance the progressivity of both personal income tax, corporate income tax, and other forms of government revenue. The second point we want to make is that, like in the presentation, there wasn't enough emphasis on the real changes to social spending, while the presenter spoke about how 60% of government expenditures is going to the social wage bill, not enough. They never really spoke about what has happened between 2023 and the revised estimates compared to 2024. So what we can see is that there's been a cut in real terms of 8 billion rand in health, and almost 10 billion rand real cuts in learning and culture, including which also includes a 4 billion rand cut in basic education. While we recognize that increasing interest rates are a problem, as evidenced in the increase in the debt servicing costs, we want to remind committees that there are alternatives to these increasing interest rates, as we have outlined in both the presentation and the written submission. Then there was a point about the fiscal anchor. We wanted to ask about whether this, if the fiscal anchor maintains the primary budget's surplus, whether this reduces the ability of the state to meet its constitutional obligations in the future. There was also a point about fiscal multipliers, and the previous speakers touched on this a little bit. We also just want to say that the methodology around fiscal multipliers is quite broad, and there's like a lot of critiques around this. I think the Treasury document uses a single paper from Hugh Wider to discuss the issue of fiscal multipliers. But I think further discussion is needed on how credible the use of fiscal multipliers is in general. I also just wanted to state that in the paper, in the summary, it says that critically the results are purely from the perspective of stabilization policy and should not be read as a comment on the fundamental welfare properties of fiscal expenditure in general. So it only looks at stabilization policy, but not in terms of what are the expenditure priorities in the state and aspects thereof. I also just want to say that my last comment is about the disappointment in that the SRD grant has not been increased above inflation for the past since 2020, and I think there is a general viewpoint about getting more commitment from government around when the decision will be made around the expansion and improvement of the SRD grant. Thank you.
Yeah, I know we agree with you. It's just practical and other possibilities of that. Okay, then next is the Institute for Economic Justice, and I hear the taxation representative is here too. So there's the last two there. IEJ, are you here?
Yes, I'm here, Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. It's just to emphasize some of the points have been mentioned already, but to say we're grateful for the opportunity and the presentation from Treasury. We haven't seen the employment tax incentive, excuse me, review or the studies that have been undertaken to assess its effectiveness. And I think we'd be keen to either from Treasury or to get that report and that assessment. And I think it's the spirit with which we are saying that the budget and budget processes should be undertaken to review policy decisions, and where they are not working, cancel them. And that's why we as part of our recommendations, we raised the issue of assessing or making a thorough assessment of expenditure and the needs that are required there, which is not acknowledged in this presentation, as earlier as mentioned, that the only time which when you're dealing with when Treasury is dealing with fiscal consolidation, they mentioned that they're protecting key programs, but only this is acknowledged only in nominal terms. And I think we need to, in the review and assessing key expenditure, it's only fair that we assess this in real terms, taking into account inflation, taking into account population growth. And that's where we see the extent of fiscal consolidation, and we can, honestly and thoroughly assess it, assess its impact on the population and its impact on advancing socioeconomic rights. And I think that this should be done more regularly. And I think it's just to also ask if there is any plans to undertake a similar review, for instance, on tax incentives such as medical tax rebates, such as retirement fund rebates that accrue to high income earners, as a step towards reviewing and promoting a more equitable tax structure. Are there any plans to do that? As the process has started with the AT, I think it shouldn't end there, but should be extended to expenditure, but also to any proposals that are being made or can be considered for tax, and this be shared with the committee and the public. And then on the point of the global minimum tax, I think the point there in terms of raising illicit financial flows was just to illustrate the extent to which we could be raising revenue and the flows that we are losing. But I think it's understood that those are two separate processes. But the point on the global minimum tax from our side, I don't know from other colleagues, was to say that South Africa should align itself more with the UN tax convention to develop a more transparent and global South-led initiative for a global minimum tax, as opposed to the inadequate OECD-led processes. And we've spelled out why the case is in our submission. And so that was to make that point around the UN tax convention and its potential to draw substantial revenue. And this is a process that has been led by African ministers and countries, and has been put on the table in the UN tax processes, and is currently underway. Other than that, it's just to add the last point on debt. I forgot the slide that it mentions, but it's just to say in 2021, the national budget considered debt stabilization at 89%. For 2025, we're seeing that in the current budget, it aims for a lower debt stabilization, which is 75%. And it's just to ask what are the considerations that are undertaken to review and assess the threshold that which debt will stabilize, what influences that, and what decisions are behind that. Thanks.
Taxation Association, you can come in now.
Okay, here I am. Sorry, I'm just struggling with my system there. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, it won't be too long. Let me, oh, did I disappear again? Let me see if I get this back. Are you there? Okay.
Yeah, we are.
Okay, sorry, I did something. I threw my system up. Yes.
I can see you.
Look, thank you. It's good to be back. Thank you for the opportunity. Let me just say, I think Treasury's been fairly open. And I think, the Treasury is looking at the situation and we agree with them. I mean, we have to be realistic. The bottom line is there's only so much money to be had. And we're hearing a lot of people wanting to do more and more. But the bottom line is the money isn't there. And so what is Treasury going to do? So, at this point, to start saying, well, we wanted to spend more money, we can't borrow more. We're tapped out on the borrowing. You can see that our local banks are not willing to pick us up anymore. And then if we start to if we start doing things wrong, we're going to bring inflation, we're going to bring the currency into a problem. Taxes, as I said, yeah, you can get a little bit more here and there, but to be honest with you, there's just not enough taxpayer growth around. So what do? So unfortunately, we're in a situation where even though people don't like it, we have to face austerity. And the only real issue that's a problem is which we're picking. Now, the point is that Treasury only has so much say over what can be done. So they have aggregate numbers, but they can't say what's going to be cut. And our real problem in this country is implementation. And I think the DG showed it rather well, that you're not getting bang for your buck. So to simply spend more money is not going to get you the growth. So, I mean, I understand where people want to go in a dream world, yeah. But in the world we are today, the bottom line is that to push us more down a direction of more and more spending, ultimately it's hurting the economy now, and we're entering into a negative spiral. We have to get out of it. And the most important thing is bringing down that debt. And unfortunately, everybody's got to share the pain. The only issue is, can we prioritize the right things? And is Treasury allowed to do that? I think Treasury is doing the best they can, but they're really not allowed to cut maybe some of the sacred cows. And that's where the problem is. We have to make some hard decisions on the allocation of the expenditure side to do it what we can. But given where Treasury's at, really, I don't think they could have done any better. And maybe the numbers reflect that in the markets. But really, that's where we are. So I'm very supportive, and I also appreciate that Treasury has been very open. And again, we're seeing a lot more openness at the lower levels. And again, one of the issues I have here is the openness of the Treasury needs to be replicated by the other departments. There are other departments that are simply too defensive. Treasury cannot be the only one that's open for debate. So thank you so much on that, and I will see you soon.
Does any of the other stakeholders from civil society want to say anything? We're stuck by there for 4 minutes because it's not fair. Later on, we found a lot more space. I should have checked, I apologize, to see how many of the stakeholders are here and then split the time accordingly. It's very unusual that so many haven't turned up. I wonder why. Anyway, we are where we are. Matthew, anybody else want to say anything? Well, you can come in later if you want. I don't see any of them. Yeah. Who wants to go?
Kwasatu would like to have a bite.
Yeah, come in. Yeah. Okay, 2 minutes, please, if you can. Squeeze it there.
No, thanks, Chair. Will you offer me additional time?
You can have 3 minutes if you want. Yeah, okay.
No, thanks, Chair. I couldn't resist the chance to do some propaganda. No, Chair, look, on a serious note, look, I think we support the Reserve Bank kind of relief for the state, and we appreciate this is a once-off intervention, and that's why we think it really should be utilized to give support to Eskom and Transnet, because that's going to have a multiplier effect into growing the economy, saving jobs, increasing tax revenue down the road. We do want to appreciate the kind of relief on the fuel levy, but I think we're also kicking the can down the road. The RAF is a disaster. It's got about 400 billion rand worth of liabilities that it needs to be restructured, overhauled, and the Department of Transport has simply been sitting on it for years, despite even Parliament putting pressure. Chair, we understand the issue of not adjusting tax brackets for the high income earners, but we were disappointed that no relief was given for the 3 lower income brackets who really do feel the cost of living increases. We had some engagements, Chair, like about a month ago on the ETI, the Employment Tax Incentive, and we were quite amazed when talking to colleagues from government who said, I think exactly as Dr. Muller said, that there's been no evaluation or research or evidence to show what's the impact of creating jobs. So it would be useful, Chair, to have a holistic look at all the various incentive support to see are they having the bang for buck. Can we look at maybe consolidating them or repositioning them? Given the amount of money being put there, we shouldn't waste that money. I think, Chair, one kind of disappointing thing is that we speak about the master plans, industrial master plans. There is some good work being done, for example, on the clothing one. I think there's some work on the poultry and sugar, for example, but we're not really kind of translating that support to a budgetary assistance as well. And not everything would come in the budget, yes, but we should really be saying these are growth opportunities for the economy. We should be giving more support to them. We think, Chair, that we know there's not much space in the fiscus, and I'll also get to the end, but we do think there is still some space for more reprioritization. For example, Chair, the CCMA budget is R1 billion a year. It's got a 23% increase in demand for cases to be resolved by workers, yet we somehow find space to allocate about 3 billion rand a year for the VIP unit to protect politicians. So we think that's just a kind of indication of a mismatch. And of course, we do think, Chair, we should have a discussion with the CETAs, the UF, etc., about how can they give more support to growing the economy ultimately. I think let me stop there, Chair, but yeah, just to appreciate that, and we'll put our written submissions to the committee coordinators. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anybody else on the first lot, fiscal study, PEP? I won't say anything on that lot.
I don't see any hands.
Yeah, nor do I. Okay, then let's go to PBO and FFC. You can take 7 minutes, and then if there's space at the end, you can come back and take another 3. So shall we have you then? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and we really thank National Treasury colleagues for commenting or responding to some of the points you've raised. And I'm just going to start also by accepting, recognizing and agreeing with our Treasury colleagues around the issue of transparency, how much of it is recognized globally, highly ranked about around transparency, budget transparency, but also important to also recognize around budget oversight as well. South Africa is going quite high as well around budget oversight. Within the Parliament perspective, the one area of improvement required is around the meaningful public participation, which is an issue that it has been addressed a lot, and I think colleagues have commented on that as well this morning. I think, Chair, I want to start by also emphasizing that in our presentation on Tuesday, we did try to show the progress on national development targets, particularly look at employment growth and inequality, how far we've gone in that regard. And our concern was that the budget 2024 budget proposals are unlikely to make a meaningful improvements in these areas. And that's really what we said, linking quite broadly with our concern around the continuous divergence between planning on one side and continuous contracting the budget framework on the other side. And our concern is that with such a contraction budget not looking quite broadly, with fitting within the planning side, we are likely to take longer to actually realize some of these macroeconomic objectives. And I really want National Treasury to comment on this specifically, as this, in our view, Parliament has to have oversight mechanisms around measures put in place by government to create employment, to lead to growth specifically in the oversight model, given that these are macroeconomic objectives. Second point around fiscal consolidation, a lot has been said around that. Our concern, our point is that we've seen this be implemented over time, the strategy be implemented over time, and we've not seen growth over time. We've not seen investment has declined, and employment has also worsened, but also poverty has not really lived up to how we expected, even the debt and GDP ratio as well. I guess the question, our message is to say, what has been done this time around, which will lead to macroeconomic outcomes being improved in this regard. Thirdly, the issue of investment, South African investment to GDP ratio has been very low, in part due to government's lack of government broadly, including state-owned corporations and private sector, not meeting the NDP targets. And a question to say how we can realize growth investment if such targets are not realized, and what's the plan around this specifically. We agree with the National Treasury government, particularly around the capacity, the need to improve capacity on energy security, freight, rail, and port, and so on. However, it's important to caution what we caution against, saying our economic problems really started with these supply side issues. We know some of the structural issues that are sitting in the economy, and that has to be taken into account. The issue around interest rate inflation targeting, I think what we're saying there is that the higher interest rate has in part contributed or hampered some of the economic growth development over time, given that higher interest rate means credit become expensive for business and household to invest, impacting on investment in particular. South Africa has a short to long-term interest rate that has been consistently higher for the 20 to 28 years or so when compared to other OECD countries in particular. And this is despite strong evidence that shows that credit extension it's likely to impact positively on investment in the economy in particular. But also recognizing point we want to raise around the interest rate links to debt servicing costs in government is also to note that as a result of the high interest rates determined government will pay more interest rate in this regard. So it's within the monetary policy, it does impact on service cost as well. The issue of unemployment growth, economic growth, income inequality, these are macroeconomic objectives similarly to the price stability. Our concern is that our monetary policy over time has prioritized price stability with limited focus on employment and growth. And so, Chair, what we emphasize around this is say, how to make sure that as much as we provide targets for price stability, we should take into account the need to target employment and growth in particular in addressing the socio-economic, macroeconomic challenges we have in our economy. We agreed on structural reforms in a presentation, in a previous presentation, recognized the importance and need of structural reform. However, we have also noted that we have to recognize limitations that structural reform has, including the fact that supply side interventions, yet part of our economy has demand problems. Secondly, the structural reform will not necessarily transform the economy as we want. Instead, they're likely to reinforce some of the concentration in certain sectors of the economy. And lastly, structural reform are likely not to change the structure of economy, which is one of the key issues that, in our view, and also in terms of literature, needs to be at the heart of fiscal strategy going forward. The last point is around debt. What we're saying that debt and debt service costs there, we just emphasize the importance that they were concerned about that level of debt as PBO and deficit. But however, we want to draw members' attention that the fact that the debt GDP ratio increases in part due to lack of growth. So the issue of growth becomes important as the debt is as a result of lack of growth. We've also drawn attention to members to realize that I'm using the phone, so the phone just rang now. Okay. I'm done. I'm almost done. Having higher than interest rate, higher than economic growth will lead to growth in debt GDP ratio, regardless of how much expenditure we reduce. And that's very important to recognize that the importance of dealing with that. It's a lot to do with growth in that regard. Fiscal rules and anchor, the message, one line, we're saying we've seen have this over time as been shown by colleagues. Our concern is that excluding some of the key macroeconomic objectives, like employment, economic growth, and inequality will certainly, as part of the fiscal rules, will certainly hamstring government's planning in realizing these macroeconomic objectives. So that has to be taken into account. Hence, our message that it hampers government planning. We need to take into account these objectives in realizing those in setting those fiscal strategies that's approved in this regard. The issue of tax, it's important to know that, understand that over the 28 years or so, South Africa has actually had a low tax to GDP ratio, averaging 24% compared to many of OECD countries, where it is average about 35% up or so. And this meant that government's revenue has been very low and forced government to borrow within with 3% to ensure that government's the rule of 27% of expenditure gets maintained. This means government expenditure has been consistently around 27% of GDP over the past 28 years or so, compared to how it's been in other countries, particularly OECD countries, which are above 35%. And that's important to recognize that they need to actually have a more bigger debt to GDP ratio, which will ensure there's a bigger space to realize some of these objectives in particular. And the issue of the corporate tax, it's important. I plead with the chairpersons that at a later stage, let's discuss it quite openly, because at times we get to discuss the session rate, at times we get to effective rate. It's important to note that our effective rate in South Africa is far lower than many of the countries. 27%, it's a station rate. That the actual tax paid by corporate taxpayers, it's far lower than 27%. Many studies show that even below 20%, below 15%. In other sectors like mining, you see that it actually below 10%. So that's very important when you have discussion around the rate of corporate income tax. We take these things into account. I'll stop there, Chair. Can I just give Siraj to comment on one specific point? I'll stop there. Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you so much.
You're at 8 minutes, so you've got only 2 minutes to be fair. You can come back later, Siraj, please, 2 minutes.
Chairperson,
Yeah.
I just want to ask a question, please.
Yeah.
We've heard now from the Parliamentary Budget Office. My understanding is that there were role players that were giving feedback, inputs, etc., to the budget process, and that Treasury was then responding, and then the opportunity should be to the stakeholders who wanted to participate in the debate between, well, obviously giving their views. It's not really a debate between the Treasury and the public. It is a parliamentary
That's right.
Committee. And so I was just wondering why it is that then the Parliamentary Budget Office is sort of, I don't know, I wasn't quite sure, but their role is to advise the Parliamentary Committee, not to be participating in the debates as such. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out, just to make sure that we're not getting confused as to what we're actually doing here. I support the comment that was made earlier on, is that the expectation of the public out there who have put in their questions, proposals, recommendations, etc., the idea is that they say, well, okay, we've seen the budget now. This is our position on it. We are saying this to Parliament, which is us, the members of Parliament. So they want members of Parliament to listen to what they're saying, obviously process it and think about it, and then respond in some way. It's not a debate between the public and the Treasury. And it's also not the Parliamentary Budget Office role, in my view, to be giving any inputs like that, unless I'm missing something. But the point is of the Parliamentary Budget Office is to advise the committee.
I get you.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to point that out. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, I mean, as you well know, this has been the way we function since, I think, 2015. But I said earlier, excuse me, too much of time was given to them. And the norm has been, I mean, you've been here many years, maybe you missed some of these things. They're always given a chance to speak. And the FFC is given a few minutes too. So let's do that in the next term. I won't be around, of course. You will, and your team from Treasury will pick this up. Okay, Siraj, can we postpone yours till later? And you see also, Dion, the stakeholders whom we invited this year turned up in far fewer numbers than ever before, so there's more space available. I had originally said 5 minutes, so I don't think there's anything wrong. We're not going to put this to a vote. This is the last sitting of this term of Parliament, but it's something you can negotiate if you're back with the new incoming chairpersons and so on, whoever they are. Okay, for now, Siraj, just let's postpone your input. I'll come back to you. I'm sure there'll be time. Okay, let's go to the FFC. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Chair. Just to appreciate the response from the National Treasury, and also appreciate government's response to the recommendations of the Financial and Fiscal Commission as indicated in the budget review documents. We also, Chair, are going to further deliberate on these matters as well with the Standing Committee on Appropriations in the coming week. I don't know if my head of research has a few comments. Chen? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Chair, through you, Honourable Chair and Chairpersons and Honourable Members. So from a technical perspective, I'd like to make 2 points. We find Treasury's response on the fiscal framework for the 2024 budget to be comprehensive, balanced, and in line with our research. We too have observed over the past few years various submissions by stakeholders with conflicting and fluctuating views on the fiscal stance of our country and the developments of the discourse, resulting at times confusing views on the matter. In contrast, as FFC, we have not wavered from our research and position that we cannot borrow money or raid for money, hoping to spend our way out of what is a structural problem of inefficiencies and fiscal leakages. We must reprioritize to make better use of the money for better value. We made this position clear and consistent throughout since our submission on the 2019 medium-term budget policy statement in 2018 and to date. However, Chairperson and Honourable Members, if allowed, FFC's submission and research on the budget is not limited to this submission we made on Tuesday this week to the Joint Committee, Honourable Chair Members, but also that in our submission for the Division of Revenue 24-25, tabled in Parliament dated end May last year. In terms of our submission for the Division of Revenue then, with Commission recommendations, in W1 annexure of the budget review, as my Chairperson pointed out, National Treasury responded to only 3 of the 29 FFC recommendations mandated by the Constitution. Treasury did not respond, showing due consideration of the recommendations regarding critical issues of SOEs and basic income grants in our Chapter 2, learner materials and transports in provinces affecting our children learning and going to schools in Chapter 3, fiscal sustainability given inflation and rising global tensions in Chapter 1, winters come in handy today, I want to say, and local government basic services and cost recovery in Chapter 6. In this 2024 budget, Treasury only responded partly to the spatial inequality considerations in municipalities, Chapter 5, and Chapter 4 in climate change, saying that conditional grants are not suited for addressing climate change as such, stating the obvious and not the meaning of our recommendation. But much appreciated to this opportunity, and thank you, Chair and Chairpersons, Honourable Members.
Thank you. We're a good 10 minutes ahead of time, but we'll come back to you, Siraj. Right, over then to members. Right, whose hands are up? Nobody, I see. I do. Okay, Joe. Well, Joe, you'll come in obviously at the end, right? Imzonia Emani, and then Dion, and then Dennis, and then the co-chair if nobody else speaks. Okay, go for it in that order.
Thank you, Chairperson.
I see Dorothy also, yeah. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Chairperson. Firstly, let me note the presentations by National Treasury. Just my characterization of what just happened this afternoon is that Treasury, I mean, people that made these presentations, these submissions, are very well-informed people, they are stakeholders, are specialist institutions, as it were. So it's not like some people from the street that are just excited or emotional. These are people that are experts in their fields. I would have thought that with such a huge expert input, that there would be 1 or 2 concessions of sorts from National Treasury to say, okay, we hear you and all of that. But my honest assessment is that what we've heard today is actually justification, and I might even add tone-deaf justification of why Treasury has done what it has done. So basically, Chairperson, if you are probably surprised as to why other people are not here today, it could very well be this kind of attitude where people say everything, they pour their hearts out. But when you look at the outcome at the end, it's almost like they haven't said anything, as it were. So the ones that are here, maybe they are lucky that one or two things that they've said have been accommodated, I don't know. But the greater majority that is not here, I suspect, and I'm just speculating, that they are exasperated of saying the same thing and not getting anything. Just by way of critical example, number one of the things that had been raised is also the issue of the grey listing. And Treasury has not said anything today about the FATF recommendations. Last year, we were told that around February or something, there would be much more compliance around that time. That time has come, but when we get the reports today, stone dead silence about what is it that Treasury has done to deal with the grey listing issues from FATF. You also have the unsustainable debt to GDP issue, and everybody has been raising this. And instead, what we get is a blue sky kind of response, waxing of lyrics, and all kinds of trajections that are optimistic. And now we have to live with some optimistic trajections that there's going to be stability and all of that. But the fact of the matter is that last year, we were told that the economic growth is going to be 0.8%, but instead it went to 0.6%. So therefore, I want to say that for me, I don't think, well, for me, these trajectories, they don't give any comfort, as it were, because past experience, as soon as recent as last year, is that these trajectories, they just get missed all the time. I mean, even if you look at the issues of the NDP, they had all kinds of trajectories. All of them have been missed. So there's no comfort in a highly blue sky kind of presentation about what is going to happen when the reality is very different. For instance, some of the realities that are on the ground, see the advantage that we have as members of parliament is that beyond sitting in air-conditioned offices, we do go to the ground just to see whether all these policy pronouncements, how do they reflect on the ground. And what we have, Chairperson, is not a pretty picture. I mean, for instance, there's some rumors as well around the issues of some 50,000 people that might be affected by Treasury's what seems to be an irrational action on Itala Bank and all of that. And I don't go into too much detail about this, but there is something brewing there, and 50,000 people will be affected if Treasury continues in the way it's rumored to be doing there. We have ArcelorMittal, a very big company that is being undermined by scrap metal industry and all of that. We don't hear what is it that's going to be done. That company is going to retrench some easy 4,000 people, and there's going to be a chain reaction of the loss of employment. And as a result of that, is going to impact on the fiscals, because all those taxpayers are going to be out of the system. So those are the real things that are on the ground, that I don't hear what is happening on that beyond the academic presentations that we get. NSFAS, as things stand, has been reduced by a whooping 16 billion. And at the same, as you do that, you've got young people that are sleeping in passages in these institutions. And you say to yourself, what is this? I mean, this big English that we hear today and all of that, yet on the ground, the experience is very different. I have a problem with this, Chairperson. I mean, the petrol price, I actually just think that the only reason we have a reprieve on the petrol price right now is really because of elections. I suspect that after elections, depending on who's in power, things can go either way. Yeah, so I'm not persuaded by what has been said here today. There was a time in this country when the country had become a construction site. if you drive around today, apart from people painting the road, you don't see any cranes and all of that. And with all these trillions that the National Treasury has, I'm not seeing any determined focus on capital formation, So yeah, I have a direct question as well, Chairperson, which I want a clear answer on. With all these appropriations that had been done, there's almost 8 billion that has been appropriated to the presidency. I just want to know, when National Treasury did that, did they have a plan in front of them as to where is this 8 billion going to go, or is it just some slush fund of sorts, as it were? So yeah, I think I must stop there, Chairperson, but just to say that I think that we need to have a situation where when stakeholders, we should take stakeholders seriously and not just tick a box. When stakeholders have made input, if you think that, and I'm not saying agree with their input, but I think the response one I would expect is that, as you say, you've heard things about this, that, or the other, show why those things are wrong or whatever. Don't just say, okay, we've heard you talk about this, our position is this. We've heard you talk about this, our position is this. Instead of critically maybe pointing flaws on what the stakeholders are saying, so that a person can go back and say, okay, I raised my issue. I think I've been defeated. I've been given the superior logic about what's wrong or what's right with what I've just said. But to simply say, we've heard you, our position is this, I don't think is according the necessary dignity to the hard work that stakeholders put in making these submissions. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. You know the order. I'm not going to keep intervening, right? You know the order. According to what I see, it's Dion, Dennis, Dorothy. Oh, and there's also Gozana. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, thanks to Treasury for those responses. Yes, indeed, Chairperson, I have been around for a long time, and I'm likely to return. But anyway, we will take up that issue in the next Parliament then. We have got a growth problem. We all know that. We have a growth problem. Our economy is not growing, and there's no signs of growth. And it is true, if you look at the history, that Treasury has consistently over-projected growth. It's been over-optimistic, and we saw what the consequences of that were in the adjustment budget, that there was quite significant cuts that happened as a result of not getting the revenue from the projected growth that we did not get. So we know we have a growth problem and that there needs to be an intervention. And anyway, our position on that is clear. We also have a spending problem. And that spending problem is that obviously government does not have enough money for all the priorities it wants, and therefore it needs to make choices. And again, I've set out our position very clearly as to what we think government's priorities should be instead of the priorities that they do have. And that then, of course, brings us then to the debt problem. So the growth problem and the spending problem brings the debt problem. And now we're spending over 1 billion rand a day on interest. And we know where that goes. Anybody that can actually count knows that this is not sustainable, and this is a recipe for disaster. We are heading into a very, very difficult position, because without the growth, without the economy growing, without the revenue that we're getting, and without the spending cuts in the right places, we are not going to get debt under control. And the problem will not go away. And eventually the payments on the debt will crowd everything out. So, you know, that's not even objective, a subjective view. It is objective. The numbers don't lie. But we will see what happens in the future. And that will come probably quite soon. So we know that's the problem. We also know that we've got a massive cost of living crisis going on. That people are starving in South Africa, literally. There are 5 million children that are starving today, according to the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. Households are battling to put enough food on the table. That is just fact. That is fact. And the question is then, what is the response to that? The raid on the Reserve Bank is not going to make any difference. 150 billion rand sounds like a lot of money, but it's going to just fuel inflation, and government will carry on going. So the recipe is not working, and it isn't going to end well if things do not change. We could have, for example, we could have cut the fuel tax. We could expand the zero VAT rated food basket, which this committee or the National Assembly Committee has put in our report. So obviously that's a different conversation. And several other things could have been done. But of course, we're not seeing that. Also, fiscal rules. That is the function of Treasury. And that's the nub of my question, is that we do have, Treasury says it has fiscal rules. And I've made proposals in my private members bill also. But the thing is, if you look at the numbers, whatever rules that Treasury says it is applying isn't working and will not work. Because if you can do the projections and Treasury over projects, and even they have got a very low number. So that is what we need to know. And what I want to know from Treasury, then, given that we're having this conversation, is what is Treasury doing to make sure that government doesn't end up in the place that is where nobody wants to go, where we literally run out of money? Because that is the function of Treasury, actually, ultimately, as the technical part that participates in the budget process. So that is fundamentally important because, as I said before, if you just look purely at the numbers as they are sitting in front of us, if we do not get the growth, and we're not going to get it, and if the spending carries on going like this, even with the raid on the Reserve Bank, we are in enormous trouble. And that cannot be accepted because the consequence of that trouble is actually starving children and households. And that we cannot have in a country like ours that is actually rich. Thank you, Chair.
Next.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, well done, Treasury. I think your responses have been of a very good quality. I don't like some of the answers, but we never will. But I do think it's a good response. I just want to add my voice to Prof. Sachs's comments about longer time to process this. And I also welcome his comments where he said, you know, the discussions this week have been seriously higher grade discussions, and you know, I certainly have learned plenty coming out of it. And I think that to give this process a little bit more credibility, it would be really useful if we had a bit more time to process it. And I think that goes for a number of aspects of the budget process, where our timeframes are extremely narrow. And, you know, as new concepts are introduced to us, I mean, I learned about things on Wednesday I didn't know existed. I had to research them in between and come up with the answer or some sort of an opinion by now. So I do think, Chair, if we can agree that in our legacy report there does need to be a fairly strong comment about the timeframes being reviewed in terms of the legislative review that happens in the 7th Parliament. So yeah, I also think that having this meeting on a Friday afternoon, you know, coming from a corporate banking background, that was what the time that we invariably use for what we euphemistically called networking. So that may have shortened today's meeting, but yes, that's on a lighter note, Chair. Chair, I do think that I wanted to comment that, look, the one thing, the ETI being reduced is not even on the cards. So I know that was something that Treasury spoke about, and looking at our employment and particularly the youth employment numbers or unemployment numbers, so scary. ETI should probably be increased rather than decreased. It was just one thing that really jumped out of the presentation for me. The one section or two sections that I really think should have taken a little bit more time responding and dealing with, Chair, is the grey listing and the GFECRA. And I think Dion and Sean and Michael and myself have all pointed out the fact that, you know, the projections that are put down are all fairly optimistic. And we've seen what happens with these projections going forward, and the impact on fiscal policy is really important, because if one takes, for example, Treasury's optimism with the grey listing, they referenced the press release that they put out the other day. All of the other reading kind of points to the fact, and including reading of page 167 of the budget review document, all of that reading points out that we're unlikely to get out of grey listing as soon as Treasury is hoping, and the experts and the commentators all kind of make that point and agree. And the cost of that is substantial, because as our palatability fades in the international arena, longer term bonds mature and they're not rolled over or renewed, and people look elsewhere, because we're seen as being not just a temporary basket case, but being on a basket trajectory. And I do think that the impact of the grey listing on our longer term fiscal policy is going to be important, because of those projections and how it will impact those going forward. And I think the same goes for the rate on the Reserve Bank's gold and financial exchange, foreign exchange reserves account goes. The costs of that and the implications of that, and how that's eroded our kind of capital base, and how we perceive going forward, is going to have material impact on our projections. And I do believe that we need to be even more conservative than we have been in the past, and certainly based on the track record. That's the point that I really wanted to make, Chair, is that a lot of fiscal policy relies on projections and things happening in the future. I'm not sure that we're in the position that we want to be in terms of that. But yeah, we'll take our report and see where we go from there. Thank you very much, Chair. And again, thanks to all the presenters and contributors. You've added huge value to this discussion.
Go ahead,
Thank you,
Comrade
National. Yes, thank you, National Treasury. Thank you, Honorable Chairperson, for giving me this time. And National Treasury, thank you for your informative and well-researched presentation. But however, due to the fact that we have to face daily challenges in our communities, we'll always have questions about debt and economic growth. And my first question is going to be, around the debt. Do the National Treasury's projection on debt sustainability factor in high growth in a circumstances of improved competitiveness from the supply side? And another question is going to be around the economic growth. And that's the second one. What inferences can be drawn between the relative growth projection of economic growth despite the supply constraints, and what economic performance can be attained when supply challenges are addressed? And the other one, the last one that I'm going to ask, it's going to be on the gold and foreign exchange contingency reserve account. So why has the GFE CRA been leveraged for debt sustainability measures and rather sustained non-interest spending than declining non-interest spending? That will be all for now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next. Comrade Skosana is here.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon to everyone. Yeah, no, we really welcome and appreciate the presentation from the National Treasury, which serves as responses to the submission by various stakeholders on the public hearing. The presentation, it's good. However, I think there is a room for improvement, Honorable Chair. I think in future, I think it would be good if the National Treasury can try and respond to all submissions, particularly on the recommendations part. Because, well, I know you can't respond to everything because we had a number of stakeholders, quite a number of stakeholders. But I think various stakeholders, there are quite a number of stakeholders who have given recommendations or alternatives that they think this is what the National Treasury should be doing in order to deal with the challenges that we are facing. So I think we would really appreciate to hear the views of the National Treasury on those particular recommendations. I mean, if the National Treasury can be able to say stakeholder A has made the submission like this, and our view as the National Treasury is that that recommendation it's not doable because of 1, 2, 3. And then stakeholder B has made the following recommendation, and we think that is doable, and we will look at it in future so that we avoid having stakeholders maybe making the same submission every year, but then we find that on the part of the National Treasury, it's not clear whether those submissions are things that are doable or they are not doable. So we should be able to know whether is that doable or not doable. If it is doable, why it's not done. Then if it's not doable, then we must also be told. I think stakeholders would really appreciate that. I think also ourselves as members of the two joint committees would appreciate to hear responses from the National Treasury with regards to that. I think that's the room for improvement that I think in future National Treasury should also look at. And then just to raise a few points, some emanating from the submissions. One with regards to the underspending. I think we know that we do have a challenge of underspending in government departments and in government entities, and the poor spending. Sometimes it's caused by poor planning by the government departments, different spheres of government and government entities. So I want to know from the side of the National Treasury, whether do they have any measures in place to assist government departments, different spheres of government and government entities in order to improve their planning, project preparations, and build capacity and capability to be able to spend on time by improving their planning and project preparations. Secondly, concerning the issue of tax incentives, I know we've got different tax incentives that the Honorable Minister normally refers to. I want to know, how are these incentives contributing to local production and beneficiation? And how can we strengthen the use of those incentives to promote domestic industrialization? And then finally, Honorable Chair, what are the key determinants of evaluating the effectiveness of these tax incentives? And are our tax incentives productive, and noting their low impact on inequality and unemployment? So are we able to say, due to these incentives, there's a movement, there's an improvement in terms of bridging the gap of inequality, in terms of reducing the unemployment rate? Are we able to really measure to say, because of these incentives, are we really benefiting? Are there some form of key determinants of evaluating their effectiveness? Thank you very much, Honorable Chair.
Thank you. Chairperson Maswangani. I don't see any other hands up. Nope. Yeah. Go ahead, please, Comrade Joe.
Okay. Thanks, Chairperson Comrade Yunus. Comrade Yunus, I see a stakeholder down there with the returns Minister of Finance. Is the Minister of Finance in attendance of this meeting?
Not that I'm aware of. In Kulaleku, are you here, Minister?
If you check amongst the participants down there below Michael Sachs.
Yeah. Well, I didn't
that?
notice it. Yeah, no secretary alerted me, and you're the only one that picked it up. I don't think the minister is here. Maybe one of his staff members is using his, or is he here and distracted right now?
We were not informed, Chairperson, of his presence either.
All right, welcome. What else can we do? Yeah. Are you worried about somebody using his device?
Yes.
Oh,
we
can
must
you
who is using his device?
Yeah, you're right.
The DG must clarify, is here in the platform.
Yeah, great. Okay. DG, can you follow up? You're absolutely right, Chairperson. Sorry, I didn't pick that up.
Yes. Okay. Thanks, Chairperson. This question that I'm going to raise, I will request that it be in a written form because we don't have much time here. There is a question asked, I think it was by PBO the last time we were here, as to where will growth come from. I had, and let me welcome the response by Treasury first. Thanks very much for the well-thought response. Can you please put it in writing as to where will growth come from? All what you have been speaking about, so that when we compile a report to Parliament, we're able to say that this is what Treasury is saying in regard to growth, because the serious challenge that we're facing now, which is causing all this problem of debts and all range of other issues, is because the economy is not growing at the pace in which we expect it to. But we can't lament. We are leaders. So where should growth come from? So that when we submit a report, at the end, Parliament takes a decision. It must take a decision which is well-informed, Chairperson. So as I'm saying, I don't expect them to go into details now. If they can write to us and spell it out in simple terms, that these are the areas which, if they can be thorough attention paid to them, things will turn around, because we are in a very serious situation as we speak, which I don't want to go into. The question or the issue raised by Honorable Manya. As I'm seated here, I also got a call from one of the leaders in KwaZulu-Natal. I think the DG is still here. That National Treasury has instructed SASSA not to disperse the grants through Itala today. And as we speak, the recipients of SASSA grants are stranded. I don't have the facts, as I'm saying that it's one of the leaders who called me. Can Treasury confirm whether it has instructed SASSA that there should be no grants that should be dispersed through Itala? If that is the case, who should disperse those grants? Today is Friday, and what should happen to the recipients of those grants? And as I'm saying, Chairperson, I don't have the facts. Treasury can refute this. Maybe it's somebody who's just pressing an alarm button unnecessarily. But if it's factual, let's get the information from Treasury now, because we are politicians. We have to respond when people ask us questions. We can't be mumbling. And lastly, I heard Edgar saying that there's an international consensus on fiscal consolidation. I think it is his views. There are lots of scholarly articles contesting fiscal consolidation and austerity measures. including recently the debate or the address by the UN Secretary General Guterres, where he was talking about the issue of fiscal consolidation. You can Google and look at his speech. So I think the matter should be put differently. There can't be a consensus on a matter like this. It's highly contested. Look at the literature review in this regard, and you will come to a conclusion that there's no such an international consensus. It's a matter that is highly contested internationally and domestically here at home. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. Very quickly, firstly, why is it that you only get the IMF to do the assessment? What about other bodies? Even bodies of international experts or academics or whatever. The chairperson's covered me on fiscal consolidation. I mean, you know, I see Chairperson Masongani saying to you, there's all this literature. Of course, you're familiar with it, surely. It's a very sweeping comment to make and slightly provocative. So I entirely agree with the co-chairperson. Also, on how to grow the economy, many stakeholders also come here and say, yeah, and we all agree, unless we grow the economy, we ain't going anywhere. So, you know, but often when people come here, they don't spell out precisely how we're meant to grow the economy. They are like, you know, what lawyers say, head of line arguments, you know, and it's like a slogan, a shopping list, but they're not fully explored. And I strongly feel, and we raised this before, I don't think we got around to it, there needs to be a discussion between the two committees early in the new term, and Treasury, PBO, and FFC about this. And at some stage, an engagement with civil society actors, some of whom are here. Yeah, it's long overdue, the discussion on fiscal rules. I've already covered that. I think that should go into our report. On illicit financial flows, once again, we plead. I think things are happening at SARS, and I personally feel it's a good thing that the current commissioner's term is extended. I think this should be included in the report, but the majority must decide whether we agree on that or not. On the process of the hearings, it's not cast in stone, Dion. It was consensually agreed with David Mania and I think Alfreeze. And you know, quite frankly, we used to have it slightly differently, colleagues, before. We put MPs coming in earlier, but then a lot of repetition occurred, and so we switched it to the end so that we hear all sides. The role of the PBO can be discussed. My own view is there's nothing wrong, and it's fine. It gives us. And I think women should also be a bit careful about recognizing that some of us have come from the financial sector, or we academics, or we people who know insurance and so on. And others of us here now have not had the opportunity. And so what PBO offers, people might get riled about some of the positions they take, but they help to new members particularly. Look at the NCOP, we've got totally new members, apart from Comrade Tikuledi and me. And I have no doubt that PBO has contributed, which is part of its role, to getting us to understand concepts. But you know what? You can decide in the new term. There's nothing cast in stone. I agree with Imjonele, really, Mani, that there's very little said about grey listing. My own view, for what it's worth, tentative though it might be, is actually we fell far short of what we aim to do by now. And there's no obvious indication that we're going to significantly improve in the next year. But I'm acutely aware, as I think we all are, it's not the Treasury's role alone. Many of the responsibilities are with the, Justice Department and other departments. And it's a bit unfair if we target you. But government as a whole knows how important this grey listing is. And Itala, I really think that this is also in the media. I happened to attend a meeting here in my province. It came up in a furious way. I don't know, DG, you have to engage with the provincial treasury about this. There's strong feelings about it. You'll recall we made every attempt to rescue African Bank. And we failed. all of us, Parliament too, to see what was happening in BBS until it was too late. Now in Itala Bank, we can't let it collapse. And the chairperson has just raised this issue. I liked his term. We can't mumble about. I love that term, Comrade Chair. So I really think Itala, you have to do more. I don't know what can be done between now and the elections, but this is a big, big issue. And I think appropriately, there should be quite a bit, well, not quite a bit, substantial points made here in our report to Parliament, but the majority will decide on that. On ETI, yeah, I also don't understand why you're not doing more. I hear you, Treasury. We've raised this thing with you repeatedly, but given the dire situation we're in, I really am not very convinced. I hope somebody in the committee has a better technical understanding of what we can do in reply to Treasury's response. You might want to give a quick response. I think I know exactly what you're going to say. I also think members are allowed to say what they want to say. But I'm not sure that it helps anybody to use very emotive terms. A basket trajectory, coverage, a raid on the reserves, a raid on the reserves. Oh man, I mean, some of these international experts haven't seen it as a raid. And in fact, some of them have welcomed it. As far as I know, comrades, the rand shot up after the minister's speech. Raid on the reserves. Like it's something, you know, that's like not monitored by anybody, and it's beyond, it's invisible and so on. On the issue of transparency, look, man, consistently, we've been reminding our opposition party colleagues that it's not us, it's the global structures that keep talking about the highly impressive level of openness and transparency. And it started, I think, in Trevor Manuel's time. And we consistently among the top 2 or 3. Not the UK, not the US, not Sweden, us. But I think I agree with Michael and others who say that the transparency is higher now than it's been in a long time. And may that continue. Generally, I think most of us, including in the majority party, accept that the state is weak compared to the tasks we have. And we need the active participation of civil society. And as Mr. Mania says, I mean, these people who come here, they're really good, you know. In the public procurement bill, I must tell you this week, I was so impressed with the quality of the inputs. That doesn't mean that we agree with everything they say or that we immune to the ideological and other biases of academics simply because they're all professors. We're not intimidated by that. But the truth is, there is a very high quality of it. In fact, it's been getting better, I think, over the last 2-3 years. In fact, over the last 2 years. And these people are very accomplished, many of them, the economic experts and what have you. So, we can't let this quality of participation fall away. What is the point of us having public hearings if ultimately so little of what is said becomes policy? That finally is not the responsibility of Treasury, it's us. It's us in Parliament that ultimately decide on the budget. And in our 5-year review, we have to point to the need for more skills. How is this wonderful Zakele Shlope, for example, or Esther Mohube going to match Treasury with all your technical skills? I'm talking about the technical level, all the travel you have overseas and attending all these conferences. And look at your armor. Look at your group of people. Comrade Co-Chair, we've raised this thing with other committees too, in so many discussions on the need for Parliament to be appropriately capacitated. And in technical areas like Treasury, and given the importance of the budget, more than ever and more than most committees, I imagine. Maybe Justice also needs more support. But this is something chairpersons and whips and others, and opposition members too, we have a common interest we need to fight for in the next term. Okay, I'm done for now. Can we throw it back to Treasury, and then we'll give some of you who wanted to speak a chance. We're at 14:51, so we've got a good, what is it? I can't add and subtract, which is why I'm chairing the NCOP Committee on Finance. What is it? 9 and we're 39 minutes. Treasury, don't take all 39. Let's hear from the stakeholders and the MPs to reply. Why don't you take about 15 minutes, maximum 20, And then let's throw it back to members and civil society and other stakeholders. And we should give Sarat some space, really. Next term, you all can kick them out if the majority agree. But for now, this has been the norm since 2015, I think. Okay, let's go for it.
Thank you, Chair.
Speaker Duncan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Let me just switch my camera on again. There we go. Thank you, Chair. What I will do, with your permission, is just run through some of the questions. There were one or two direct questions to myself, and then the team is on standby and we'll try to do it as quickly as possible. Chair, in terms of the question around the minister's name, we found the culprit. It was the chief of staff of the minister, so nothing to be concerned about there. We did double check that. On Michael's direct question about the whether the fiscal transparency evaluation will be publicly released, yes, it will. We are just waiting for the public release to be finalized, and it's certainly, Chair, I think you spoke about 3 to 6 months or so. It'll certainly be much sooner than that. I think we can, in a written response, also give the committee a sense of when that will be. Certainly, my sense is that it'll be able to take place within the next few months, if not weeks. On Sean's point about the fiscal multipliers, what we did this year in the fiscal multipliers box, we also put a link in there, honorable members, that takes the public and anyone else interested to a body of research that we were very much involved in commissioning and doing, some of our staff directly involved in the work, that represents, in our view, quite solid technical work on the issue of fiscal multipliers. I think it's a highly contested space. I think you want to be guided by the best technical work, and it certainly is an area that probably requires further discussion between ourselves and the PBO and others. So always happy to participate in those. On FATF, Chair, you've covered me partly. We did issue a media statement on the FATF matter yesterday that goes into details on where we are in terms of the progress. But I do agree that we have a lot of work left between now and June next year. And certainly it's going to require a whole of government approach. My colleagues will come in on some of the other questions around tax and the presidential employment stimulus and so on. So I'll leave those questions. Why JFECRA for debt? On the one hand, we wanted to ensure that any benefit that JFECRA brings to the fiscal framework is not committed to ongoing expenditure, because it's a once-off benefit, as it were, and that's why, in our view, the nature of the balance sheet transaction that we've undertook, it made most sense for it to be used to reduce our borrowing, given the challenges that we've discussed earlier. Why not give it to Eskom or Transnet? Well, Eskom already has a 3-year provision in the fiscal framework in excess of 200 billion in the form of the interest-free, hopefully to become interest-bearing loan. And Transnet already has a guarantee in place. And in our view, the combination of the guarantee as well as the turnaround plan will allow Transnet to have a successful turnaround. I do think, Chair, I take the point about us being much clearer about what's doable and what's not. And that's certainly something I think we can be much more deliberate about doing. The challenge, of course, is what do we do when there is actually disagreement on an issue? And the ETI is a very good example. Some people think it should be scrapped. Some people think it should be increased. And in those cases, it's quite difficult to take a particular firm view on something. But I do want Chris to come in on some of the evidence we've done in that respect. To the Chair's question, where will growth come from? We can certainly, Chair, make a written submission in that regard. So we will do that. On Itala, there was a direct question whether there's been any instruction for those payments to be stopped. No, there hasn't been. So that is a matter that we have been discussing over the last few days internally in the Treasury as well as with the Reserve Bank. And certainly from our side, there is no instruction for any payments to be stopped. And we are working with the Reserve Bank on resolving that matter. The final issue from my side, Chair, and then I'll hand over. I see Edgar's got his hand up. Why do we ask the IMF to do these assessments? Well, two reasons. One, to your point, Chair, there are some assessments that are done as a matter of course by institutions like the International Budget Partnership, and those are available. But the IMF in this instance has a very specific fiscal transparency evaluation tool that they apply, which is why we've asked them to do it. The additional value of the tool beyond the insights that it gives us, and I did say we will publish it, the additional value of the tool is that because the IMF applies this to a range of other countries, it also helps us to benchmark ourselves against fiscal transparency reforms and progress in other countries. So it does have a helpful international benchmarking component to it. Chair, I will stop there and please ask.
Shouldn't go to the IMF. What about other independent institutions which are less ideologically biased? That's the point. I understand why you'd go to the IMF, but why only the IMF was the question. Will you mull over that? And before we put, obviously, your answers to the chairperson, co-chairperson, and on when you're going to have this discussion with the stakeholders on fiscal rules, all of that should be in by tomorrow afternoon, because remember, the Sunday is the key day when they do the draft, and when we, the chairs, get it and start looking at it, engage with them. So please don't forget, the deadline is 5 p.m. tomorrow. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Chair, and we'll certainly mull over that. Edgar, I'm sure would like to come in, followed by Chris and other colleagues. Thank you, Chairs and honourable members.
Through you, Chair, before Edgar comes in.
You asked about grey listing. You want the chair? Yeah, he's right.
As the accounting officer, I think we need an answer from an accounting officer, not from some official. From an accounting officer, what is the position on grey listing?
Well, he did answer, but maybe not full enough. Do you want to add anything else? I mean, he did answer, to be fair, Mr. Mani, he did answer. But go ahead, if you want to add more, Duncan.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. I mean, I could take the committee through the very detailed response that we put forward in the media statement yesterday. There are really two issues there. I mean, I'll also just put the media statement into the chat group. There are really two issues there. I think
please do. Yeah. Good.
Yes, no, we can certainly do that, Chair. I think the one issue is that of the 22 action items, FATF confirmed, and maybe I should start, Chair. Sorry, maybe I should start by saying that the FATF plenary took place during the week of the budget. And so typically what happens is that we are not allowed to comment on FATF matters until the FATF plenary has concluded its report and allowed us to publish the information in that report. They concluded that over the last few days, and we therefore published the media statement yesterday. The media statement goes into quite a lot of detail, but let me highlight one or two points just to respond to Honourable Manye. The one is that 5 of the 22 action items that they've set out for us are now addressed or largely addressed. And I think that's the point that I made about the fact that still a lot of work lies ahead between now and June next year. And those really relate to the legal provisions criminalizing terrorist financing and some of the issues around South Africa's financial sanction regimes. So in terms of the action items, there's still quite a lot of work to do between now and then. In terms of the other areas, they have confirmed that 14 of those actions, of the 17, have now been partly or fully addressed. And so in those areas, we only have about 4 outstanding items left. And we'll talk about, in the media statement, we talk about what our strategy is insofar as dealing with those. But what I will do now, Chair, is I'll just drop a link to that media statement in the chat box as well, if that's okay with you. Thank you.
Yeah, Chris has put something there. I don't know if the statement or the full report there, but fine.
Chris has already done it. Yeah, that's the media statement. Thank you.
Okay, good. Okay, over then to Edgar.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, very quickly, just to clarify on the matter of fiscal consolidation that was raised. Just to clarify the comment which was in the presentation. Unfortunately, because of time, we weren't able to elaborate on everything, but I agree, and maybe I didn't put it elegantly enough, that there is no consensus on the fiscal consolidation. So I wasn't saying there's a consensus. I was saying that I was replying to the point made on Wednesday to the effect, whose recordings I checked again, that fiscal consolidation has been universally rejected. It has not been universally rejected. It has not been universally accepted. That is my point. Only to say that in the context of South Africa, in response to those questions, in the context of South Africa, we've tried to implement it in a way that is balanced and not self-defeating, which was the speech which we have read a few weeks ago by the UN Secretary General, where he referred to self-defeating fiscal consolidation. So we tried to craft it in a way that is not self-defeating there. And then the last point from my side, Chair, is in respect of the question from Honorable Mabile on the debt projections. Yes, the debt sustainability model is constantly being worked on, and we continually improve it. Our debt projections are, the way to think about them is that we have a set of debt projections which speak to the fiscal framework and obviously the baseline fiscal strategy that's been, that's gone through cabinet. But then we also have scenarios around the baseline that we constantly work on from a technical perspective, that obviously change as decisions change before a budget is tabled. And those take into account scenarios of what would happen if certain things change in the economy and certain macro variables are adjusted. And so, but the debt projection that's presented does include the baseline assumptions in respect of both growth, exchange rate, inflation, and various other macro variables that are there. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, Duncan, from your side, are there any further responses?
Yes, Chair, Chris would like to come in on some of the ETI.
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah, that's right. Good, Chris, over to you.
Yeah, afternoon, Chair. Afternoon, honourable members. There are quite a lot of things. I'll try and do them very quickly to try and address a lot of the tax issues. On the health promotion levy, why isn't it increased? Just to highlight again that there are lots of differing objectives in government. The Department of Agriculture has a different objective. DTIC has a different objective. We try and weigh up those objectives between trying to reduce obesity and reduce non-communicable diseases with the potential impact on industry. The current discussion is that we didn't change that levy. We obviously were worried about non-communicable diseases because we did introduce it originally. We just haven't made that change this year. On SA wine, part of the reason was for a fiscal framework. As part of this fiscal consolidation, we needed to raise revenue. The alcohol industry was seen as one of the players that should raise revenue through higher than inflation excise duty increases. There was a concern this might reduce consumption. To be honest, we're happy with that. Reduced consumption of alcohol does have a wider societal benefits. We would worry about illicit trade. It has been taken root in the tobacco industry, and we are concerned about that in alcohol, but it doesn't mean that we can't increase excise duties. Again, this is in relation to an agri-master plan, so there are, again, these differing objectives, and in this case, the decision was to raise rates there. it must be noted that the wine, the effective tax rates per volume of alcohol on wine are quite a lot lower than beer and spirits, which was also part of the decision making. On the corporate income tax and the corporate tax burden, we have done that package, which will adjust and shift the amount that is taken from those companies from one company to another. It doesn't mean that we only taxing the profitable companies. Some of those companies might have assessed losses in the past, so maybe they made losses in the past, but they will be profitable now. And profitable companies can have large interest burdens, which we were clawing that money back. There was a feeling that the effective rate is very low. Not in our view. The marginal effective tax rate is low for additional investments, but overall it's not low. And we do have a very high corporate income tax take as a percentage of GDP compared to other countries. There was a view that we're not trying to increase the tax to GDP ratio. That isn't correct. We're raising taxes to try and increase the tax to GDP ratio. We don't have a limit of 25%. We can go higher if we want to. We would prefer to improve administration to get additional revenue that way and increase the tax to GDP ratio there. There was a view that we have a low tax to GDP ratio compared to OECD countries. And it is low compared to OECD countries because a lot of those are at a much higher level of development. For our level of development, we believe we have a high tax to GDP ratio compared to other countries at our level. If everybody was working, if everybody had much higher incomes, we would most definitely have a higher tax to GDP ratio like those OECD countries. On the ETI reports, there are so many ETI reviews out there. I think it's one of the most evaluated tax incentives this country has ever seen. Some of them say that there are small but positive impacts. Some of them say there are no impacts. The latest one I've seen says you can't actually tell whether there has been positive or there has been negative impact or any impact at all. So it's a very mixed bag in terms of the reviews that we get on this incentive. Of course, this is one of the only incentives we have to try and reduce employment. So it's a very difficult one to give up immediately, which is why we are evaluating it. There was a question, will we do further evaluations and publish them? Yes, we will. We've published previous evaluations on incentives. We published on the learnership tax incentive. We published on the research and development tax incentive. Those go out for public comment, and then they can either be amended or extended. And then there was a view on FATF was dealt with. Then there was a view on incentives. Do they help localization and beneficiation? A lot of the tax incentives, especially in the corporate side, do help with localization. They are for investments that take place locally. We get accelerated depreciation allowances for those companies. But a lot of that investment is in capital. And this is part of the problem where we have greater incentives for capital instead of employment. An employment tax incentive is one where we actually do try to increase employment. They are there. We can continue to include the amount of tax revenue forgone from those incentives in the tax expenditure statements. And it is part of the IMF recommendations that we strengthen those tax expenditure statements, and we will try and do that in the coming years. Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Honourable Members.
Right.
Thank you, Chair. With your permission, just two quick additional interventions from our side. Mampo on the spending side, and then Boipuso on some of the economic forecast issues. Mampo.
Thank you, DG. Thanks, honorable members. Just a quick one. The issue on the employment programs that we have. In total, Chairperson and honorable members, we have 61 billion over the MTEF that is allocated for employment programs. And these programs include your Community Works Program, EPWP, but we also added the Presidential Employment Initiative to the numbers. And if you look at the budget, the amounts are allocated for 24-25. However, there's a provisional allocation going forward because of the understanding and the importance of the employment programs that exist in government. So it's only allocated for this year, but there is provision for the MTF. And then finally, there are employment programs that are managed and implemented by public entities. One of those will be the Unemployment Insurance Fund, and that is through the Labour Activation Program. Thanks, DG. Thanks, Chair.
Next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, honourable members, and thanks to the DG for indicating that I'd like to come in. I think most of the questions on the economic side have been answered, and to your request, Chair will be sure to respond in writing to some of the questions. particularly in relation to where we think growth is going to come from, which we've covered quite extensively in Chapter 2, but we'll happily also respond in writing. I did want to reflect briefly on the observation that came up through several interventions on the quality of forecasts or projections that the Treasury provides to inform the macro fiscal framework. I think first, from a contextual perspective, it's really important to flag that the past several years have been reflected or have been marked by significant uncertainty, not just in the global environment, but also domestically. And that has had implications for forecasters across the board in their macroeconomic projections. As part of this, or at least to try and navigate this, one of the things the Treasury has done consistently and continues to do is invest in three things that help us to formulate our macroeconomic projections and views. Those are the people. We ensure that we have consistent, good quality training for the individuals who produce our macroeconomic baselines. We ensure that we have good quality tools. And you will note from the 2021 MTBPS, we had indicated that we had updated our model that we use to provide our medium-term projections to ensure that it's aligned to international best practice, but also that it takes into consideration significant changes in data, like we saw with the data rebasing that happened in 2021. The third is that we ensure that our processes are robust and able to ensure that we are able to provide the best quality forecasts. In light of all of this, and subsequently what we found in terms of the quality of Treasury's forecast, which has been presented or evaluated by peers, including the BER and the PBO historically, the general view is that, at least from these individuals and also some of the work that we do internally, is that the National Treasury's forecasts are at least as good as, and in some instances better than, some of our peer forecasters. And just to reiterate once more that, of course, we are making these projections in an uncertain environment, but our sense is, and the feedback that we are receiving from these analyses, is that the National Treasury's forecasts are robust and are fit for purpose to inform the macro fiscal planning process. Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, comrades, who wants to come in response? While people are itching towards putting their hands up, Sraj, do you want to come in for 2 to 3 minutes, please?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Honorable Chair. And I was willing to give answers in writing, but since you've given me 2 or 3 minutes, I'm happy to speak now. I think what this process shows is the importance of giving people like the PBO and FFC the right to respond. I think if the Treasury is able to respond to our presentations, we should be given at least one round to respond to their responses, and also to kind of clarify what we're saying. And I think the important thing, and this is partly a response to what Edgar was saying in terms of the kind of evidence or quotes that we put in our presentation, is that, you know, unlike the Treasury, we actually try to include alternative macroeconomics perspectives. And so we put in the perspectives on fiscal consolidation by somebody like Larry Summers, who was the former, basically, Minister of Finance of the US when Bill Clinton was president, where refers to his empirical work and his literature reviews that talk about the negative impact of fiscal consolidation on growth and debt levels. So I think that's the important point. To come to, I think the more important point I want to respond to in the rest of my time is on this issue of fiscal multipliers. And I agree with what Sean said, and I think Sean made a really good point, and I just want to add a bit to that, is that the NT has chosen to present only one side of the argument on fiscal multipliers. What is clear from a literature review of the studies of the past 2 decades is that the approach to economics, supply or demand side, affects the size of the multipliers. More importantly, the studies favored by the NT to support their arguments that the fiscal multiplier is low have inherent theoretical and statistical difficulties and weaknesses that raise questions about the results, including many acknowledged by their own authors. The DG spoke to a link in the I think it was a budget review in the box we mentioned, and we've studied all those reports. We've looked at the SA Tide work, we've looked at other work, we've looked at international literature reviews, and just the latest one, I think that the Treasury really likes, that talks about fiscal multipliers low as 0.14. I just want to read a short thing from the conclusion, where they do what I said. They basically question their own methods and methodology. They say we use a new method by Chan et al. 2020 that allows us to estimate larger TVP-VARs. This method is an exciting development that has clear potential. However, our experience in implementing it to investigate the question different from that of the original paper is quite frustrating. The available code for performing the estimation is not user-friendly and required a large amount of work to convert it. Then they add, hence, in addition, while the model seems to be able to allow for integrated processes, we found the results were highly unstable when implemented with non-stationary data. Hence, we were forced to use a model in first differences, which implies a loss of long-run information that may be necessary for measuring fiscal multipliers accurately. Now, there's a lot of technical jargon in there, but I think what they are doing is acknowledging the difficulties they had trying to do it, the methodological differences, and also in doing the econometrics and the statistics applications, they actually lose a lot of information and makes it not necessarily suitable for measuring fiscal multipliers. None of that has come across from the National Treasury. So I think that's
Chairperson.
Yeah.
On a point of order, please.
Yeah.
As I said earlier, I'm getting confused here. The PBO, the Parliamentary Budget Office, provides information and support to the committee. That is their function. Their function is not here to come here and to start going through a whole very technical analysis that many of us may well battle to understand, pointing out various things which may or may not be correct. But that's the whole point that I've said before. The function of the Parliamentary Budget Office is to provide information and feedback to the committee. The committee engages with the public, who we represent. So the public, who we represent, and we are the voices of, we take feedback from them, we listen to the inputs given by the public, who we represent, and then we discuss it in a committee. We then, as is usual, as you've said, Chairperson, many years, I've been around as well, you too, that what we do is we then get Treasury, who has worked with the Minister on the budget, etc. They then put their position, they respond to questions, etc. And they make projections, as we said, and sometimes they're not correct, etc. We know all of this. But what is confusing me here is that the Parliamentary Budget Office is now giving some kind of a view of its own, and you know, I just don't get it. That their function is to inform the committee, not...
Yeah, okay.
You get what I'm saying, Chair? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, you see, this is a matter for debate. Until now, you haven't raised this issue. It's exactly what we've been doing for years. The only difference is that the secretaries did what they did without conferring with the chairs, gave them 10 minutes. But this matter you can discuss in the new term. We've got fewer than 10 minutes left. Can you round up? But, you know, I don't think, you know, there's much point pursuing this. In the next term, you can decide as a collective. I don't think you'll carry the majority, but, you know, I'm certainly not going to put it to the vote. It's your view, and I think it's Dion's view, and maybe Willie Outcome's view, and I don't know who else, but the majority haven't had a problem with this. But we hear you. It's recorded in the minutes, and you will be here, and you'll take it forward, and then the majority can decide what you want to do. Okay, can we move on? Now, Imzodela is raising this thing which I don't understand, because I think the DG said there's no truth that the grants, SASSA grants, are not going to be processed. At least he knows nothing about that for now. He can give a written reply in the next 24 hours to the committee. But is there something else, Mr. Manya, you want to raise apart from that? Because you did reply to that.
I must have missed it, Chair. Maybe I want to quickly get some water. I missed the response. So is a response that what we hear is not true.
That's what he said, yeah. Am I right, DJ? Is that what you said? You don't know any such thing? You don't think it's true? And if it's not, if your information is wrong, you'll come back to us by tomorrow morning to let us know, hey, I got it wrong. I acted in good faith in my reply, but it ain't correct because you've learned something maybe through the SASA department and so on, right? I mean, what's that? Social Development Department. Are we fine? Then you've raised other things there in the chat.
Sorry, Chair. Sorry,
Go
Chair.
ahead. Go ahead.
Chair.
Yep, right. Right,
Are
go.
you saying the DG does not know what is being alleged to be the case? What is being alleged to be the case is that the DG, or rather National Treasury, has sent some note to...
Yeah, he's saying that's not true.
He says that's not, categorically, that's not true. On
That's
record, in Parliament.
Yeah.
That's the position.
Yeah, but it may be possible that the Social Development Department has done something unbeknown to them, and he's going to check it all out and come back to us if what he's saying in the House, which he's acting in good faith on, is wrong. So we'll get the answer in the morning, or maybe later today. Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
Okay. Now the other issues raised in the chat, I think you covered, right?
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Can members please look at it? That's very helpful, the chat, where you get long answers. Look, there's a reply there from Duncan, quite some length about the 8 billion. I hope the committee staff is noting that. Right. We're at 22 minutes, so we've got 8 minutes left, but we don't have to use 8 minutes simply because it's there. Is anybody wanting to speak? Who's Christo? All right, go ahead, Christo. Christo.
No, it's fine, Chair. Can I speak?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. No, I think I want to say thanks to Chris for the response. I think it's important to acknowledge that. I think a previous speaker mentioned the justification versus concessions. I think what's important for us just to understand, and that is what I would like to applaud Chris in terms of providing context and perspective. And given the fact that I'm wearing a wine hat this afternoon and also Monday and Wednesday during these submissions, I still would like to leave it in the midst of the team to say when you talk about liquor and when you talk about sin tax, just bear in mind you need to look at the drinking occasion, you need to look at the characteristics of the different categories and the consumer needs. And I'm not sitting here to talk about wine against any one of the other categories. I'm just saying in terms of our submission, also referring to the World Trade Organization and the World Health Organization, the reports. I understand what Chris is saying, but maybe I don't need to agree with him. So Chris, I will keep on arm wrestling and saying, well, the 2.5% above the CPI, I want to ask you, please go and maybe reconsider. You've got the opportunity to maybe grant us a concession and make it equal to 2% above CPI, the same as the others. And I think with that we can live, given all the challenges that we're facing at the moment, from load shedding, generators, etc. And that's all I want to leave with you, Chair. And thank you for the opportunity. Really appreciate the conversation, engagement, and dialogue up until now. Thank you.
Thank you. Sean's asked a question about the 4 billion, and the DG's replied, right? Is there anybody else who wants to say something or clarify or anything? Good. Okay, we'll be looking at the report, and then Treasury, Duncan, will you ensure that you send somebody there? Because sometimes nobody turns up from Treasury. I know you overworked. You also applied to us on the NCOP side for an extension from next week, Friday. Members, I'll send that to you on the public procurement bill. It's worrying, but I can see the stress you're under with the provincial, budgets and so on. Okay, so having said that, Chairperson, Maswangani, do you want to say something before we close?
Thanks, Comrade Eunice. As you have suggested to the DG, so that this matter is not used for politicking, because we are now in the season of campaigning for 29th May. This issue of SASA, National Treasury, Presidential Authority, and Itala, if the DG can send something to us in a written form, that this is what we are doing. Because as I said, I got the call from a very senior member of the ANC who's a leader in KwaZulu-Natal. And so if that panic button comes from him and other people in that province, what about an ordinary person in Ngwavuma? So we'll really appreciate to have that information in a written form from the DG to say this is what we're doing in regard to Itala, and there is no way national government, because Treasury is the custodian of funds in this country, of fiscus. There's no instruction from Treasury that SASSA should not pay the recipients of SASSA grants in KwaZulu-Natal or anywhere in the country. That will be quite helpful, because we have an experience of a VBS collapsing under our watch, and we don't want another bank to collapse under our watch in this regard. Without going into detail what National Treasury and Prudential Authority are doing, we don't want those details, but something in a written form will assist us in a great deal, as we are playing an oversight role on Itala. Last week we were there on the 23rd in Durban, going to Itala offices, meeting the board, meeting the executive. We visited some of their branches, but in the main, I think it's a branch in Anton Lembed. After we have had the meeting with Itala, I think it was last week, Tuesday. So I was making a follow-up on your suggestion, Chairperson. Thanks very much. I'm covered on quite a number of issues, and I will welcome what the DG has committed, that they will put something in a summary form as much as is there in the review. But call staff members in the office of the minister not to masquerade as a minister. The minister is an elected official. No one should abuse the platform of working in a minister and use his gadget. That is uncalled for an official to behave in that manner. Thank you, Chairperson.
Yeah, I know. I think we'll all agree with what you're saying. Okay, we're done. Thank you very much, especially to the civil society stakeholders. We're sorry we had a Friday afternoon, but obviously the NE had a sitting this morning, and so it is that we had to meet at 12:30. But it's been very helpful, productive to us as MPs. I think I speak on behalf of most, if not all of us. And Dion, please don't ever repeat that until the next term of Parliament. Okay, thanks. Bye then.